This is my brother's girlfriend's story. She doesn't have a Reddit, but I told her about this subreddit, and she wanted to share her story. Because it's creepy, but also because you can learn from it. I go to school in a big city that is one of the least safe cities in the United States. I chose this school for nursing, and definitely not for the location. I live in a row house, off campus with 3 other girls. Cheaper and nicer than dorms, or so we thought. I guess you get what you pay for. We are all girls and sophomores in college. As you would guess, we go out for drinks, come back to things that we don't remember. We just started our rent in August, 3 floors, plus a basement, which was padlocked by the owner. Understandable, we would definitely have parties down there to avoid immediate cleanup. The house was great, amazing location to school and work. I am a CNA who works odd hours, which will be important later. It was not expensive and in good condition. I had never lived with this many people before, just one roommate, so before we would definitely know if someone had misplaced or changed something. I started to notice that my snacks would either be half gone or completely gone. I was getting annoyed, but in a house of many people, it was too much work to try to figure out who ate it, so I just ignored it. Slowly, as girls do, we started making comments about someone eating our food, but in a passive-aggressive way. We all just let it go, cause who wants a whole house fight? I worked until about 11 o'clock in the NICU, and get home about 11:30, mostly on weeknights. I started to notice pants left out or snack wrappers around. I thought it was odd cause none of my roommates had done this before, but I just think, oh, they probably drank a bottle of wine and went to bed and forgot about this. Again, my roommate started making comments. This time, we started asking because it was getting annoying that all our food being gone and things being left out. I knew it was one of them, but who wants to admit that they ate someone else's snack when in college snacks are in high commodity? We chalked it up to the girl who always smokes and eats her weight in food, but she swore it wasn't her. This went on for about 2 months. It got more obvious someone was clearly taking everyone's food. Definitely the girl who always smokes. I see her as being someone that would eat the whole snack pantry at night. I wish it was her. One night at work, I was about to get off, but a situation happened and I didn't end up leaving until 12:30. I took the bus home. I carry pepper spray, a taser, and a pocket knife, don't worry. I got home and was about to collapse. I wanted to go to bed as soon as possible. I walk in the front door, and the stairs are directly in front of you. You can also see down the side into the kitchen. I walk in and saw someone in the kitchen, but I was too tired to say hi, thinking I could end up in a 30-minute conversation about nothing, so I went straight upstairs. When I got up to the second floor, I noticed that all my roommates' doors were closed, which always meant that they were in their rooms for the night, or asleep. I got a weird feeling, just something that made it click. They were all asleep, right? I text our house group chat, asking if anyone was in the kitchen. I felt stupid for even asking. 2 responded no, and said the other 2 had been asleep. I knew it wasn't any of my roommates down there at that moment. I dialed 911, but didn't press call. I crept into my roommate's room, access hall. Thankfully, or maybe not thankfully, she didn't have her door locked. I whispered, telling her that someone was in the house. She gave me the widest eyes ever, and almost looked like she was about to cry. She didn't suspect anything like I had, but for reference, we live in a very bad area, as there was a shooting in the house 2 doors down, only weeks earlier, by an intruder. She mouthed to make a call. The whole time we were dead silent. We didn't really hear anything at all. I was starting to think I was seeing things after such a long day, and regretted that I dialed, thinking I was going to look like an idiot when they showed up, and I was just overtired and dreaming. We explained to the operator what was going on, and they said that they would send someone as soon as possible. That actually doesn't mean right away, since it's a big and dangerous city. The police showed up, and I didn't even want to go downstairs. but the operator confirmed that it was them, so I did. But the whole time, I could swear that the operator could hear my heart beating. The police came in and looked around. I'm thinking, oh God, I look so dumb. They asked if there was any other floors. We tell them technically the basement, but it's padlocked, so really no. They checked the basement just in case, and yeah, they were right. The man had been living in the padlocked basement. The lock was pulled off its hinges and just kind of propped against the wall. We never looked back there and rarely went out back. The guy had taken a comforter of one of my roommates out of the hall, had a mattress from God knows where, and his clothes. Well, he was the one moving and eating all of our stuff. He would come out in the middle of the night and do it. He started getting more comfortable. I don't know if he was drugged out or forgot to clean his tracks, or if he didn't really care. My roommates and I have pretty consistent schedules during the week, probably letting him think that any time after 12 was good to come out. We never slept with our individual doors locked, and that freaks me out the most. He had access to any one of us at any moment, and we had no idea. When he was getting arrested, I was the only one to go down and look. I don't really know why, and I wish I didn't. I took a picture in the process of him being arrested to show my roommates who were too afraid to go down, and this is him. So yeah, let's never actually meet, dude. This happened a few days ago, and I'm extremely shaken up. Some backstory. I live on the second floor of a 3-level apartment. We have a crawl space that connects all of the apartments. We're not sure why it's there, and none of us would attempt to go inside, so we felt pretty safe. The other night the sun was setting, but it wasn't pitch black out yet or anything. I was walking through my living room when I see a short woman on the fire escape looking through my windows. This was extremely bizarre, considering it was still semi-light out, and she had literally got onto our fire escape somehow. We have 2 windows that the fire escape reaches. She was looking through both of them, but couldn't see me. I crawled on the ground, and my heart was racing as I saw her try to open one of the windows. I didn't know what the fuck to do, because my phone was in the other room. After what seemed like an eternity, she finally left. I went into my room to get my phone to text my landlord and call the cops. I came back into the living room and was looking through the windows to see if I could locate her, when all of a sudden I hear a weird noise coming from the ceiling. We have one of those tile ceilings, made out of separate slabs of cork. I look up to see one of the slabs lifted up and 2 eyes staring at me. I have no clue how she got into the crawl space so quickly, but I grabbed the nearest thing next to me, which was a broom, and started hitting her with it through the ceiling. I called the cops and she crawled away. They showed up and searched the place, but didn't find her until a few days later when she was on someone else's fire escape. The cops say she was definitely on some hard drugs, and that she was violent towards them. I'm glad she's gone, but whoever the crazy lady was that came through the ceiling, let's not meet again. For the past 2 months or so, I've been experiencing people trying to get into my home. Now, I wouldn't say that they tried forcefully, but if it's not the doorknob being messed with, I'm hearing the back porch door being slammed. I haven't notified the police, mainly because it wouldn't happen regularly, and just thought it would be a waste of time, seeing that all the evidence I have is noises that I've heard. But last night's encounter might have been the nail in the coffin, as I'm generally creeped out by it this time. So here it goes. It was maybe around 11:30 p.m. I was laying in bed, enjoying another night after work, watching TV, and that's when I hear a slight tap coming from my brother's window. This made me a bit tense since the other occurrences happened earlier in the night, but this time it was way later than usual, and I had never heard tapping on the window before. I stayed quiet, and maybe not even 5 minutes later, I hear it again, but this time it's coming from my room. Some time passes by, and that's when I hear a sudden knocking coming from the front door. I continue to stay in silence, hoping that they would just leave, and that's when I hear them messing with the doorknob. A few attempts are made, and then everything goes silent once again until they start harmonizing with each other. This is when I decided to pull out my phone and record. After that, I guess they decided to leave for good, as I didn't have the guts to interact with them. All I know is that things are getting freakier than I could ever imagine, and I don't even know how to begin to get rid of them. So this happened to me a couple years ago, when my now husband and I were living in a townhouse that was in a pretty decent area. My husband was working the third shift as a corrections officer at our local corrections facility, and I was working as a waitress. It was an unusually warm night in the middle of March, so I took advantage of it and decided to take my husband's 80-pound Alaskan Malamute Husky mixed dog on a quick walk around the neighborhood near our complex. We get to the end of the street that leads into the complex we live in, and across the street is a Marathon gas station. I noticed as the dog, Luke, stopped to relieve himself that there was a guy across the street at the gas station with a case of beer in his hands. I had my phone out texting a friend and looked up to notice the guy was near a stop sign, also relieving himself on the sign. I felt really awkward and instantly put my phone away and led Luke down the street on our path. At this point, I think the guy noticed us, and he crossed the street to where Luke and I had just been. I hear him walking a few feet behind me, and just keep my head staring at my phone with Luke glued to my hip. After about 10 seconds, I hear the guy's steps getting closer. Luke realizes there's someone behind us and stops dead in his tracks. Mind you, he's a big dog compared to my 5'2" self, but I can handle him pretty easily, as he was very well trained by my husband. I noticed his ears were perked up, and his tail was straight up. I was glad that he was aware of our surroundings, but I still wanted to keep moving away from this guy. I just got the weirdest feeling. This guy finally catches up to us, so I tighten my grip on Luke's leash and pull him closer to me and step onto the grass to allow the guy to pass us and to keep Luke out of his way. Does this guy keep going and pass? Nope. When I thought he was about to pass us, I shouted out a small apology because Luke was pulling on his leash a little, trying to investigate this guy, and most people did get intimidated by him just because of his size. The guy stops and just stares at me for a minute, long enough for me to smell the cigarettes and booze rolling off of him, and notice that he's probably in his mid to late 20s, dark hair, scruffy looking, and just dirty. He smiles and then finally notices Luke trying to get at him and asks, "Cute dog, what's his name?" Instead of making up a name, I just said, "Luke." He then proceeds to ask me if he could pet my dog, and before I can give an answer, he leans down and starts petting Luke's head. Luke did not like that. Luke jumped at him as a warning, and that guy backed up, chuckling. I apologized and mentioned that he was very protective and made up a lie that he was trained by my dad's former canine unit. My dad was a software developer. Instantly, I saw this guy's face change. I don't know what to call it, but it looked like he was put off by it. He asked me what my name was, and I gave him a fake name. He then asked if I lived around here, and I said that I was visiting a friend of mine for the weekend. He made a sudden step towards me, and I'm not even lying when I say this. I've never heard my husband's dog growl in the 5 years that I've been with him, but the sound that came out of my dog sounded like something from nightmares. Luke's hair was spiked up on his spine, and he was throwing himself on his back legs, kicking at the guy with his front legs. He put himself completely between myself and the guy, and was snapping at him. This freaked the dude out, so much that he stumbled backwards, nearly dropping his beer. He quickly said, "Well, have a nice night, cutie," and stumbled off down the road. When I say that my heart was pounding, it was deafening. I grabbed Luke's leash so hard and sprinted between the buildings until I got back to the townhouse. I locked the doors and collapsed by the front door. Luke was in my face the whole time, kissing me and whining. This dog is the sweetest and most gentle creature I have ever met, and hearing him growl and seeing him react the way he did made me realize even more that I needed to get out of that situation, and fast. In late June, my boyfriend and I, both 19, were headed back from Walmart in his town. We live an hour apart, and I was visiting. I was driving on somewhat of a back road, and there's a four-way stop. Across from us was what looked like a work truck, parked behind another car and flashing its brights. Nobody else was at the intersection, so I decided to go ahead and keep driving. As soon as I pulled out, a car came speeding, somewhere around 90 miles per hour in a 30 mile per hour zone, and almost T-boned my car on the passenger side. Luckily, I sped up and got out of its way, and the car swerved and stopped on the side of the road and flashed its hazards. We were freaked out. Maybe it wasn't the right thing to do, but I kept driving because no one was hurt, probably just shaken up. So we keep driving, and my boyfriend is guiding me through the roads, and we were talking about how bizarre it was that we didn't even see or hear that other car. Then I noticed there's a car behind us. It's probably 1,000 feet behind us, so I didn't think anything of it. Then it keeps getting closer and closer. Finally, the car is on my ass. Once he's on my ass, he turns on his extremely bright lights and nearly blinds me. We realize that it's the work truck that was across the intersection. I ducked down out of the way of my rearview mirror that was blinding me so I could see the road and keep driving, even speeding up a little. My boyfriend tells me that maybe we should pull over. Maybe someone was hurt and they were trying to flag us down. But we're on a back road with absolutely no light posts and nowhere to pull over that's well lit. Eventually, my boyfriend had to hold the wheel for me because I couldn't see at all. My vision was blurry and spotty. I started to pull into a neighborhood, but the truck started passing me and we almost got into an accident. The neighborhood was dark, of course. The truck slows down to a stop and backs up so it's directly behind us, still on the main road while we parked in this neighborhood. The driver starts shining a flashlight at my car, mostly at me, then goes over to my boyfriend. After it gets to him, he shuts off the light and the truck slowly pulls off and leaves. My boyfriend and I were shaken up, and once I regained my vision, I drove back to his apartment, wary of all the cars around us. We told his dad about it, and he said it's a good thing that we didn't get out of the car. People get murdered all the time from this stuff. We thought it was just so weird, but thinking back on it, the driver probably only saw me and targeted me, and then once he realized that there was two people in the car, they didn't want to deal with it and left. They wanted me, it seems like. What do you think? This just happened. I got off work and went to my mom's to help her and my dad set up their new Alexa TV that they had just got. It ended up taking a while because we had to run to the store to grab an adapter, so I didn't leave their house until 8 p.m. And by the time I got home, which I recently moved into a few weeks ago and live alone, it was closer to 9 p.m. and pitch black. I had my hands full of a few things that I forgot at my parents' since I stayed with them for a few months before I found my place. Anyway, I'm walking up the sidewalk to my apartment when I hear him calling out to me. Hey, excuse me. Hello? Hey. I have one headphone in, listening to YouTube stories, and I try to pretend like I didn't hear him. Not to be rude, but because it was pitch black outside, and I had been up since 6 a.m. and was dead tired. I don't like small talk, and I'm bad at it. Eventually, I turn around, and we introduce ourselves. Immediately, the hairs on my arm prickle, and I get this feeling in my gut. This guy is sizing me up. He wants to know where I live, so he can break into my place, rob me. It's just something I know. It's not even a feeling, but a fact. The entire time we're talking, maybe 10 minutes, his hands are in his pockets, his hood is up, and he keeps looking around like expecting to see someone. Granted, it's cold, but we live in Arizona, so it's not that cold. But this also puts me on edge. Then he begins asking about me, how long ago I moved in, and which unit I'm in. He's obviously going to see which unit I'm in when I walk into it, so I just tell him. He makes small talk for a few minutes and then asks if it's just me. I explain, oh no, I've got my 2 dogs. I go on to say how big they are, how protective they are, and how they are roaming freely in my apartment while I'm at work, which is all true. He asks if I take them on walks and how often. Basically, how often do you leave your apartment empty? I explained to him that I have to be careful because, while my dogs love me and act like big babies with me, they are very protective, so going out is a challenge because I have to be careful about people coming up to us. and how my dogs react to them. I turn the conversation around to ask which unit he's in, how long he's been there, who he lives with. He seems uncomfortable and gives me vague answers, waving his hand behind him and saying, "That one." He seems uncomfortable about me trying to clarify which apartment he's in, so he tapers off the conversation and we say our goodbyes. I unlock my door, give my dogs the command to bark, which they do, and it's loud and vicious sounding. I immediately give them love and call my mom, give her his name, what he looks like, his vague portrayal at what apartment he's in, and a reminder of her panic phrase, so if I ever say it, she knows to calmly end the call and send the cops. Now I'm just sitting in my apartment freaking out on every little sound with my dogs piled on top of me. I'm going to call the non-emergency police and ask them to do a drive-by to make me feel safer. Update. I'm sitting on my couch replying to comments. It's 9:30 on a Friday night and I'm hearing the softest knocking. If I weren't 3 feet from the front door, I wouldn't have heard it. I have both my dogs out, my pit bull barked, and everything is locked up tight. Obviously I didn't answer, but I don't have a peephole, so I have no idea who it was. Am I overreacting? Second update. I just got home and I noticed the light on in my car. The windows are up and the passenger side is locked, and you can only open the driver's door a certain way, so I don't see anyone opening it. And his number is on my window, on the outside, with a message saying text me. On the back of the paper is information about a court date and such. I'm going to call the non-emergency police and add this to my report, and I've updated everyone keeping an eye on me. So yeah, I'm still freaked out. For 6 months last year, I lived in the north of Spain. About a week before I was going to move back to Ireland, my friend and I were at my house having dinner and drinking a little. I was renting an apartment in the city, and my roommate was an older lady, maybe in her 50s. I'm 20. That night, my roommate left to have dinner with her friends. About a minute after she had left, someone buzzed our door to be let into our building. I looked at the camera and didn't recognize the woman. She looked to be in her late 20s or early 30s, so I assumed that it was one of my roommate's friends and she was coming over to meet her or something. I buzzed her into the building, assuming they would meet in the lobby. At first, I didn't buzz her in because I didn't recognize her, and she walked away from the door, but then I hit the buzzer as soon as she walked away, and then myself walked away from the camera, meaning I couldn't see if she actually entered or not. Assuming that if she didn't enter, she would just text my roommate. Boy, I was wrong. The woman came up to my apartment building on the 6th floor. She came up just 2 minutes after my roommate left, so I know she didn't take the stairs, and I know they must have seen each other when my roommate got off the lift and the lady got in. Realizing that this was weird, I didn't open the door when she rings it. I looked through the peephole just to confirm that it was nobody I knew. At this point, I look away from the door and gesture to my friend to be silent. At this point, I back away from the door and gesture to my friend to be silent. We creep back to my room, which is on the far side of the apartment, and I begin calling my roommate, who isn't picking up. Meanwhile, this lady is still ringing my doorbell. My roommate is not picking up, and my friend is just telling me to open the door. In her mind, it was a woman, so she must be harmless. I tell her that she's an idiot for underestimating the female sex. Women can be criminals too. She keeps telling me to open the door, and I refuse. She keeps ringing, and I keep looking out the peephole. At this point, I understand that if she knew my roommate or was looking for someone, she would just called or text them. She didn't take out her phone. She just stayed eerily silent, didn't call out names or ask if anyone was home. This was just weird to me. I finally get through to my roommate. She says she wasn't expecting anyone, and she doesn't know anyone in that age range. She asks if I'm okay, and I say I'm fine. Now it's been at least 20 minutes. I know that the lady knows that someone's home because the lights are on, and my understanding is that's why she's not leaving. I continue watching her through the peephole and see her go into the lift for a minute and then come back up again. The lift is very loud, and I would have heard it move, It didn't. She just went in and came out. In my mind, this means someone was waiting in the lift for her. This screams sketchy to me. After about 40 minutes, she leaves. I run to our hall and flick on the outside camera. This lady left the building with 2 men. They all had backpacks on. I am a paramedic and have been for about 10 years. Working in emergency medicine, you'll get to see the weirdest and worst of people. So it's not uncommon for these types of stories to exist. However, in my 10 years, I have never experienced pure terror incarnate like I had about 6 years ago. I will not be revealing specific or identifying details as it pertains to privacy. This may be a bit long, but it's definitely worth a listen. About 6 years ago, I moved to another city for work. I worked for the 911 ambulance service that responded to calls in the city, as well as the county, which had a few smaller towns. The city itself was not large, maybe about 100,000 people. Working for the service required working 24-hour shifts. It wasn't particularly busy. You maybe get 5 or 10 calls in 24 hours, and generally get some decent sleep during the night. The city was a pretty rough place, as the oil industry had boomed there, which drew all sorts of folks from all around the country to work in the oil fields nearby. One night in January, me and my partner, who was an EMT basic, received a call in the next town over. It was about 2 a.m. when the call came out, and the only information we had was that the person in the apartment called 911 after hearing the downstairs neighbor screaming for help. We responded emergent, as the details were very limited. When we arrived on the scene, police and fire department were already there, and we were getting ready to make our entrance into the building with them. The person who called 911 was there and told us which apartment she heard the screaming from. We attempted to pound on the door at first to get the resident to come to the door. When no one answered, the fire department got ready to spread the door and make an entry. Luckily, the landlord showed up and gave us the key to the unit. As we opened the door, the creepiness started. The apartment was pitch black, not a single light, as if no one was home. The police entered first with their flashlights. We followed. Looking around the apartment, the kitchen and dining room looked like a hoarder's nest. I'm not exaggerating when I say there was literally a 5-foot-tall mountain of garbage, food, dishes, in the kitchen, and the same thing in the living room, but with magazines, clothes, and garbage. This meant that there was a very narrow walkway to navigate the apartment. Officers proceeded down the hallway, ahead where the bedroom and bathroom was. One of the officers stopped at the bathroom door, as there was a light shining from underneath it. The officer opened the door and just stood in the hallway. With a flat tone, he said, "She's in here." I walked into the bathroom. The first thing I noticed was the light of the bathroom. It was a very pale yellow light coming from a single bulb on the ceiling, similar to those old heat lamps that used to be common in bathrooms. The light gave off an odd vibe, as it was just an unnatural light. The next thing I noticed was the lack of anything in the bathroom. No floor mats, no toilet cover, no towels, no knickknacks. Just nothing. Empty. Except the vanity on top in the bowl of the sink were approximately 20 to 30 makeup bottles piled up. Some were open and leaking, causing there to be powders and liquids everywhere. The last thing I noticed was the body of an elderly woman laying naked in her tub. As I walked closer, I could see her laying on her side, nearly in the fetal position. Her skin was pale, and there was about 8 inches of water in the tub. Looking at her face, her eyes were closed, and her head was against the bottom of the tub, with her mouth and nose completely submerged underwater. My partner steps behind me. He suggests we call the coroner and inform him of the body. 2 officers pile into the bathroom behind my partner, so there's 4 of us in this tiny bathroom, with me next to the lady in the tub. With me being who I am, I decided to do my due diligence and at least try to make sure the lady was dead. I kneeled down next to the tub and reached my arm in and put my fingers on her neck to attempt to check for a pulse. In that instant, without a warning or the slightest hint of movement, the woman springs up out of the bathtub with the agility and speed of a feral cat. The only reaction I was able to manage was to just stand up as quick as possible. As I stood there staring at her, she stared back at me, eyes wide as can be. Before she started screaming at me, she attempted to cover herself with her hands as best as she could, while sitting in the water still. I quickly turned around to notice that everyone who was behind me in the bathroom bolted out of there. Not a single soul in sight. I tried to steady myself and tried to calm down the lady, telling her who I was and why I was there. She denied screaming and told me that she does this every morning as she has some kind of joint condition and soaking in warm water helps ease her joint pain. Now at this point, I have my doubts and I have to question this lady's sanity. I question her about self-harm and address what could be potentially interpreted as suicidal behavior. She denies all of it. The next step is to determine her mental capacity to ensure that she's in the right frame of mind to make reasonable and appropriate decisions. She answers all my questions appropriately, and at this point, per law, she's able to refuse any and all care, as she is mentally sound. I asked her if she will allow me to check out her vitals so that I can be sure that she is healthy, and I can add it to my report. She refuses and tells me to get out of her house, which she has a right to do. I acknowledge and have her sign a refusal form. As I leave the bathroom, my partner, the 2 officers that were in the bathroom with me, along with the other 2 officers and firefighters that were waiting in the apartment, are just staring at me with eyes wide and gaping mouths, speechless. I don't say a word as we all leave the apartment. Once we are outside, I had the most uneasy, uncontrolled fit of laughter. My partner and the officers started laughing too. I thought I might have shit myself. My partner told me that all she remembers is seeing her move, hearing me say, "Oh fuck," which I don't even remember, and running out of the bathroom. I wish I could say that I never saw that lady again, but that would be untrue. This one will be a little shorter since you already have my backstory. Like I said, after this call, I was able to laugh it off once my heart stopped racing. I figured that I would never have to see this lady again, and that gave me comfort. I told the story several times to my family, friends, and coworkers just because of the sheer shock value. This part of the story, I've only told a couple people, because most probably can't stomach it. So be warned, this contains some graphic content. About 3 months after the first call with the bathtub lady, I was working with another EMT basic partner. Not the same one as before, but he is well aware of the story. So the day is going by like normal, and then nightfall comes. I'm hoping to get some sleep, as generally the night is a little calmer. Each of our stations have a few bedrooms with twin beds that allow us to sleep somewhat comfortably. Take off my boots and lay down and doze. I always keep the radio turned way up and by my head so I can wake up if we get a call. Sure enough, tones drop on the radio and I wake up. Looking at the clock, it's around 4 a.m. Radio traffic requests an ambulance for a welfare check on an individual that had not been seen for a while. Me and my partner get up, put our boots on, and start responding to the address. As we get closer, I start recognizing the area. Before I even get to the building, I tell my partner, "I swear to God, if this is the same fucking lady." He laughs and we continue. As we pull up to the scene, sure as shit, same fucking building. At this point, my heart starts to race again. A few officers are already on the scene. As I get out of the ambulance, one of the officers comes up and tells me, "The lady that we are here for has a friend that works at the gas station nearby. The friend told 911 that the lady comes to visit her every day, but the friend hasn't seen her in weeks." He also told me that there's an odor coming from the apartment complex. If you work in EMS or have been around such, you know what that means. If not, then I won't spoil it just yet. I asked the officer if she's familiar with this person, or if she's heard the story of my last encounter. The officer tells me that she is not, but her other 2 co-workers behind her were on the original call with me and are smiling, but not saying a word. I tell the officer who the person is, and our last run in with her. The officer just raises an eyebrow a bit and says, "Okay." So we approach the apartment complex yet again. As I open the main door, you can immediately smell the odor permeating through the entire complex. We walk downstairs to the door of the lady's apartment. I bang on it a few times and shout, "Ambulance!" No response. Officers bang on the door. No response. We try to get a hold of the landlord again to give us access, but he's unavailable. Over the radio, I request the fire department and request that they bring the door spreader. The fire department arrives and they come downstairs. They set up the door spreader. If you don't know what a door spreader is, it's a tool that the fire department places between the two door jambs and uses a lever to start pressuring the door jamb apart, freeing the latch from the door frame so you can get in. As we finally get the door open, the awful smell spills out of the apartment. Same thing as last time. Pitch black in the apartment, piles of garbage everywhere around the apartment, 5 feet high, that barely allows you to move through. This time it's a bit different. There are thousands of flies buzzing around. Again, the officers enter first, with us following with our flashlights. One of the male officers gets down the hallway to the bathroom and opens the door. He looks back at me, shakes his head, and continues forward. My EMT partner, who is pretty new at this, is right behind me. I turn to him and tell him to wait in the hallway, and that I'll let him know when I need him. I was trying to be nice and spare him. The officer continues down the hallway towards the bedroom. At this point, the anxiety is increasing because now we are in uncharted territory once again. I have no idea what we're going to find. The officer eventually makes his way into the bedroom. I see him shine his lights into the bedroom, then uses a bent elbow to cover his mouth and nose, and waves over to me. As I walk to him, the smell gets extremely stronger. I peer into the bedroom with our flashlights, and that's when I see her. The bedroom is set up with a bed in the middle of the room, with a headboard pressed against the wall. So there is a small space on either side of the foot of the bed, or at least what would have been, if the floor wasn't filled to the height of the bed with clothes, magazines, books, food, and garbage. At the foot of the bed are 2 large 4-foot tall piles of random shit that are at the base and are about 4 feet in diameter. I know it's hard to visualize, but picture 2 large shaped mounds side by side at the foot of the bed. In the tiny space between the 2 large mounds, at the foot of the bed, lies bathroom lady. Now this lady was a very small old lady. When I saw her the first time, she maybe weighed 90 pounds. She was also a white lady. Stunned for a moment, I stand next to an officer and just look. This is the part that gets grotesque. Bathroom lady is laying perfectly on her back, with her arms folded up and crossed in front of her, just like you see a skeleton doing in the movies. Bathroom lady's skin looks almost like paper. It is dried out and shrunken, turning black and rotting. The levels of decomposition from her is one I haven't seen before. Her hip bones were visible where the skin had cracked and receded. Her kneecaps were coming out from her skin. A few ribs were just barely visible, poking through the skin, on the side of her upper abdomen area. Her hair was beginning to fall out. Her lips were gone. Her eyes were gone. I got a bit closer to look, and all I kept thinking was, if you wake up, this officer's gonna draw and shoot you in the head. I walked a little closer. She was almost perfectly preserved, like a mummy. There was absolutely nothing left of her eyes. The sockets were completely empty, with the exception of a few maggots crawling around her sockets. From behind me, I hear quite loud, muffled gags. I walk back out to my partner. I tell him, "Sorry man, but we need the body bag, and I need your help." Everyone else walks outside to get some fresh air. The officer that was in the bedroom with me gagged a few more times outside, but luckily didn't vomit. The one good thing about this is we had recently been given really nice PARP respirators from FEMA for the recent Ebola outbreak. My partner grabbed the body bag and I grabbed the PARPs. We put our gear on and walked back inside. The officer that was with me like a fucking champ came back inside as well without a respirator and held a flashlight for us. Me and my partner spent maybe 10 minutes just clearing out all the trash that we could to make enough room to get the body bag down next to the bathtub lady. Once we got enough room, the sketchy part came. If you have ever seen a body with that amount of decomposition, it's very brittle. We attempted to move her over as carefully as we could, as not to break anything. However, when we attempted to move her, she was stuck. I couldn't figure out what was going on. I was at the head, my partner was at the feet trying to move her. I put my arm down her back and neck to support her head so it didn't break off. I got down to look as I lifted to see what we were getting stuck on. As I lifted, I saw, but it was already too late. As I lifted, the skin on her back was stuck to the carpet. So as I lifted her, it started peeling off her ribs and spine. We had no other choice, as we were unable to cut the carpet at this time. We lifted her up, all her skin came off of her back and stayed stuck to the floor, almost like some sick chalk outline, which is when I saw it. What seemed to be like 1,000 maggots crawling around on the side of her skin, between her skin and her back. We moved her gently into the bag, luckily not breaking anything. We got the bag out and into the ambulance, where we would transport her to the funeral home, with our windows rolled down, and quickly, so we wouldn't have to stay with her in the ambulance. So that's my story about Bathtub Lady. Sorry for the gross details. What we figured is she died shortly after our first encounter with her, and that we may have been the last ones to see her alive.
Back when I was in high school, my best friend and I would basically hang out at school together because her dad was the warden of the local prison, and his house wasn't even a half a mile from it. Her mom was judgmental and, well, a bit hostile. It was the attitude more than anything that kept me from hanging out over at her house. She was a woman you didn't mess with. One day, my friend said her mother came home white as a ghost the night before, because when she and her friends had come out of the grocery store, halfway to her car, they stopped and noticed someone in the back seat. She was thinking it was my friend, her daughter, but as she stepped closer, she saw that it was an elderly woman. Well, she started to go to the car, but her friend stopped her and said that she probably got off the bus from the assisted living center, and she had better call the police and let them handle it. Well, she did, and within minutes, because they were practically around the block, the police car pulled up and she pointed to her car. The officer walked up to the window and she watched as the officer snatched the door open and literally yanked the old woman out and pushed her up against the car and frisked her. My friend's mom was horrified until the officer pulled the wig off of her head. Or should I say, his head. Yes, it was not an elderly woman. It was a middle-aged man. This happened just yesterday, so it's fresh in my mind. I'm not quite sure what to think of it because it was just so bizarre and unbelievable. I might have just been sleep deprived. So last night at maybe 11 o'clock I was walking around my block. My town is relatively safe, so I didn't feel any danger. Plus it was a pretty night. I had been walking for around 5 minutes when a pale woman with blonde hair and a white dress caught my eye from across the street. She was about my height and looked to be around my age too. I didn't actually pay attention to her after I first noticed her. While I circled the block again, she was on the same street, a couple feet in front of me. She was standing on the curb staring at the cars passing by. It was a main road, so even that late people were still driving on it. I said hello to her, and she turned her gaze to me. I couldn't see her face super well, but from what I think I saw, she had no pupils or color in her eyes. She just stared at me. After a while, I asked if she was okay. She didn't respond again and simply pointed at the road. I was really confused and didn't understand. Right as a red car started coming down the road, she stepped into the road. The car slammed into her, and it was a bloody mess. The driver immediately stopped and jumped out. It was a man in his mid-20s. We both spoke about it, freaking out. He called the police and I went around the car to see the state of the girl. Once I circled around the car, she was gone. Not gone as in dead, gone as in she just wasn't there. The blood on the road was gone too, but not gone from his car. After the police arrived, they concluded that it was some big hoax of a kid who didn't know what they were talking about and some guy who went along with it. The blood on the truck was brought to investigation, only to be found as paint. Nothing else happened with it. I'm still not sure if what happened was real. It felt so real. But I don't believe in the paranormal. I don't know what it was. If it was just a dream, or if it was real. I remember it like it was real. I feel like I can't leave the house now. I don't understand anything now. And I kind of feel like I'm going crazy. When I was 18, I was on my way to my friend's house for a party. We met up there, and then decided to go to the local Walmart for some beer and liquor. Between being the ages of 18 and 17, we all called our hookups and pooled money together. Eventually I got a hold of a guy, and we met up with him at Wally World. Fast forward past the 20 or so minutes of the four of us waiting in the parking lot, and we are on our way back to town. I should mention that I come from a small town, and we don't have a Walmart or anything, so we all had to go one town over. So we are headed back when this big rain just sort of appears out of nowhere. It is incredibly intense rain, and I lose my friend's car pretty quick. I was able to find it, and I start following again. At first, the car was headed to my friend's house, and so I just kind of followed, absent-mindedly. But the car started turning down side streets and looping around neighborhoods, at one point passing their house entirely. At this point, I'm starting to get confused, but figure they are just messing with me in the most stupid way imaginable. I follow the car all throughout town, and eventually the car takes a sudden turn down a back road. I don't know how many of you live in rural areas or around rural areas, but I don't think I've seen country dark like this before. This was all made even creepier by a healthy fog that kicked up just after the rain ended. It was like a legitimate horror movie setting. Now I should mention that I have been on this road before. It was a popular road for teenagers to drift on, or take booze or smoke cruises. It was secluded with no houses around for miles and miles, just vacant, grazing lands. But it was literal miles away from my friend's house, and now I was getting mad. I called up my friend and asked her, "Hey, what do you think you're doing? Making me follow you all through town like this? This is bullshit, I'm wasting gas." Then she drops the bomb. They've been at the house for the past hour, and they were just about to go and look for me. That car that I was following wasn't them. I tell them I followed the wrong car back to town and turned down another road and headed to their house. Honestly, what scared me the most about this is that I had been following these random people. They were probably way more scared than I was, and if you're listening right now, I'm sorry for randomly following you all around town that night. Let me first preface this by saying that terrible things don't just happen in the movies, but in fact, they happen in everyday normal life. Most people are lucky enough to go through life without any major encounters. I had an experience that I would like to share to see what people think. Was I rational in my choices? Did I overreact? What would you have done? I think hearing responses will be therapeutic and perhaps help me get past the events of this story. Last year I attended college at a major university on the southeastern coast of the United States. I loved it so much. mainly because I didn't have to deal with snow or the cold weather. I basically had hot or warm weather every day, which was a huge change from the climate I grew up in. On this particular spring break from school, I decided to go home and visit my parents back in Maine. I decided that I was going to try to drive the over 20-hour drive straight through, perhaps stopping for brief naps or food along the way. At first, this seemed like an awesome idea. I could get there relatively quickly and spend most of my time at home rather than traveling. I spent most of the drive listening to music and catching up on some of my favorite podcasts. Unfortunately, the trip would take a terrible turn in Pennsylvania. I was driving through Pennsylvania shortly after midnight, and well, my eyes started to get a little heavy, and I was having a lot of trouble focusing on the road. And anybody who has driven through Pennsylvania knows that it's a hard drive, even when you have complete focus. It's always foggy and very mountainous, with many twists and turns. I decided that at the next rest area, I would pull over and at least rest my eyes for an hour or two, just to be safe. Well, I never made it to the rest area. I dozed off for a second, and I lost control of my car, and went right off the side of the road through a guardrail and down to a small drop-off. Miraculously, I wasn't injured too badly, but my car was destroyed, and I was completely surrounded by trees, not sure how to get back up and onto the highway. Of course, it was pitch black outside, and the trees consumed the entire area. Blocking out most of the natural starlight, I tried to remain calm and ignore the terrible pain I was experiencing to try and call and get help. One problem: I couldn't find my phone. It was in my cup holder, but after the crash it was so dark, I couldn't find it anywhere, inside or outside of my car. No luck. I didn't think I was injured badly as previously mentioned, but I wanted to use the flashlight on my phone to make sure I didn't have any major cuts or anything. I then decided my best course of action at this point would be to see if it was possible to climb back up the slight decline that my car had fallen off of. It seemed impossible in my condition, and with the limited visibility, it just wasn't a height that I could reach at the moment. And truth be told, I was lucky that I wasn't injured further after my car dropped down. Thankfully, the guardrail slowed my car down enough. Realizing that climbing, driving, or calling anybody wasn't an option, I began to yell and scream for help. But as you can imagine, it didn't work. I slouched to the side of my car and finally started to feel real emotion. I was scared and cold, and now the real fear finally started to make my eyes fill up with tears. I had no survival skills. What was I going to do until morning? Just sit in a ball in the fetal position? I decided that walking through the wooded area until I can find an area to climb where maybe there was a slight hill instead of the drop-off where my car was. Of course, now in hindsight, my best bet would probably have been to just stay put, because somebody in the morning would have noticed the accident and phoned it in. Maybe even someone passing by in the night and noticing the damage at the side of the road. As I grabbed some items from my car, I heard a noise. It sounded like ruffling of tree branches and footsteps. I hid on the other side of my car, paralyzed in fear. What kind of animals did they have in Pennsylvania? My first thought was a bear or something like that. Is that how it was going to end? Mauled by a bear. However, what actually presented itself in front of me was even more shocking. It was 3 men coming out of the trees. I couldn't make too much of it, but all 3 of them had huge beards, looking like their clothes were completely dirty and were carrying hunting rifles. I wasn't sure if to yell for help or to stay hidden from these men. For some crazy reason, my instincts were telling me to stay hidden. which seems like the exact opposite thing you should do in a situation like this. One guy who looked like the tallest of the three yelled out in a raspy, rugged voice, "Is anybody there?" They didn't have any flashlights or anything, so I decided to quietly sneak around the other side of my car and make a run for it into the woods. As I slowly and very quietly made my way around the car, I was wrestling with the idea in my head that these people probably just wanted to help, and I was probably putting myself in more danger by running into the woods. But the demeanor and possibility of getting shot was a chance that I did not want to take. I was about 5 feet cleared from the car when I started to sprint, and of course, in no time at all, I brought noise and attention to myself. The same man as before caught a glimpse of me as I ran into the woods and yelled, "Hey, get back here!" I swear I heard the loud boom of a gunshot. I didn't hear it hit a tree or anything. I just remember hearing a loud boom. I don't know what else it could have been. I was terrified. I heard them following me from what seemed like several directions. I heard one of them yelling something about private property or restricted land, or something of that nature. I just kept running and running for about an hour, until I finally saw faint light shining through the trees. It was a road that looked like it led to a small town, or at least a few stores with lights. I walked into the gas station, feeling and looking bloody, battered, and bruised. The worker inside looked baffled and disgusted. I told him to please call the police. The police showed up in no time, and my parents were notified. They were going to drive down and pick me up as soon as they could. The police insisted that I go to a local hospital so my injuries could be assessed. When talking to the police, I told them everything about the 3 guys that came to the scene of the accident and chased me with weapons into the woods. The police said they would locate my car and take a look to see if they could find anything, or anyone. My car was empty. Everything had been stolen out of it. Even some of the interior car parts had been removed. Nothing else really came from this incident. I didn't have any major injuries, and my insurance took care of the car. I now live back home with my parents and attend school locally. I try not to drive at night if I don't have to. I guess I have a phobia or something now. I'm thankful to be alive, and well, but still have anxiety and terrible thoughts pertaining to that night. I don't know what was more damaging to my psyche, having a major accident or being chased through the woods by 3 random guys. For some background, I am a gal from Kansas, and every summer since I was 12, I've gone backpacking in Colorado. I love to hike, and getting into the mountains is my favorite part of the year. Along with the beauty, however, every year I have a moment or two that makes me question coming back out into the wilderness. The summer I turned 15, however, has been the worst of them all. My day started the same, with my friends and I waking up late and putting our packs on to hike. This was going to be a fairly difficult day, as we were going up and over Georgia Pass on the Colorado Trail, which required some difficult elevation gain. At about noon, we had reached the top of the pass and knew we were in for some needed downhill. Our group decided to stop and make lunch before finishing up the day, seeing as we were all exhausted. As my group of about 11 fellow backpackers ate, we noticed 2 men sitting a little lower on the ridge. They were smoking weed, which wasn't uncommon in Colorado, but with my group, comprised of mostly teenagers, we were giggling and joking about asking them for some. However, our trail guides obviously weren't going to let that happen, so we sat and watched them smoke while we snacked. Now, I don't want to seem crazy, but at this point, all of the boys in my hiking group had gone exploring along this gorgeous mountain line, and the two men seemed to watch me and my three other girlfriends. I wasn't at all creeped out at first, but I did make eye contact at one point, and could tell they were both either in college or a little older. I didn't think much of it, and once the boys came back, we started down the mountain into the valley we would be camping in. The men were pretty far ahead of us, seeing as it took a while to get our big caravan moving. After about 45 minutes of hiking, we took a break. And this is when the first of many weird occurrences happened. I was leaning against the side of the trail, looking down into a thick forest of trees, when I noticed a bright orange hat, one that I had seen the smoking men wearing. I squinted a little and quickly turned away when I noticed it was indeed one of the men. He was staring right at me, and I asked one of my guy friends if he saw it too, just to make sure my bad vision wasn't deceiving me. It was the weirdest thing. The man was lying down on the steep hillside, staring back at us. The weirdest part was that he didn't have his other friend with him, which I thought was very odd, as the two seemed to be close when they were up on the ridge. I was weirded out but didn't say anything to my trail guides, seeing as I didn't want to be deemed as the overly paranoid girl. We kept trekking down the hill until we reached what seemed to be the ideal camping spot. There was a nice river, plenty of room for the 4 tents we occupied, and it wasn't far from the trail. The only downside was our neighbors, who seemed to be a somewhat large group of college boys. I thought maybe that this is where the weed guys were camping, and for some reason, the large group calmed my nerves. I guess it made me realize that the guys probably weren't hermit weirdos. Fast forward a few hours, and I headed down the trail to fill up my water. Now, normally I would do this with a friend, but almost everyone was taking a nap, and most people didn't want to walk anymore after our nearly 16-mile day. I wanted to be nice, so I grabbed about 4 or 5 extra Nalgene's and decided to do a full water run. The path to the river walked right by the college campsite. I made it to the river, filled up all the water bottles, and was about to stand up from my kneeling position when I saw the orange hat again. He was on the other side of the river and was once again staring at me. This weirded me out, because this took place almost 4 hours after I saw him watching our group, and I thought there could be no way it took him 4 hours to hike an all downhill 6-mile section of the trail. Neither of us said anything, and I quickly began to walk back to my campsite and past the college boys. The man walked uncomfortably close to me, like he ran across the bridge and was within 5 feet of me. I am 4'11", so immediately wished I had taken someone else with me, but remained calm and picked up my pace. The man, unsurprisingly, turned into the college campsite. He did not seem to fit with them at all, but what freaked me out the most was that when I looked back, he was gesturing over to me with some sort of smirk. I tried to wave, a sort of peace offer, if you will, but was weighed down by my Nalgene's. Then one of the men, not Orange Hat, spoke. "You need some help, little miss?" he said, in the creepiest tone I have ever heard. It was slow and patronizing, and made my skin crawl a little, so I replied with a meek, "No thank you," and hurried back. I felt all of their eyes staring into my back while I speed walked. I told one of the guys on the trail with me what had happened, and he just brushed it off as me being paranoid over some college kids. Still, he told me he would walk by their campsite to get a good look at them, just to make me feel better. When he returned, he was wide-eyed, but wouldn't tell me what he saw or heard. This freaked me out even further, but I brushed it off as probably being some sort of locker room talk that my friend didn't feel comfortable repeating. Now skip ahead a little while. The sun had completely set, and after putting our food in bear cans, my tent mate and I walked around 100 or so meters to our tent. It's probably almost 10 p.m. at this point, and we were ready to go to sleep as soon as we could, but talked about the day and other typical high school girl topics. I told her about how I saw the weed dude in the orange hat at the river, and that he was part of the college campsite. She asked me if he was cute, and I told her that he seemed to be a total creep. She kind of reassured me and joked that he probably thought I was cute or something. This made me laugh and I fell asleep quickly, tired from the day's work. But after we had been asleep for about an hour, I awoke to what sounded like footsteps. Through the walls of our tent, I could see a flashlight coming over from where the college site was. It's important to note that our tents were arranged in a diamondish shape, with about 30 feet between each tent. We did this because the boys tended to stay up later, and this helped to keep noise down a little for those that wanted to sleep, and keep conversations a little more private. This night, my tent was the point of the triangle furthest away from everyone else, and we pushed it even further away because of the noise from the guys in the tent next to us. This is key, because I know that this light and the heavy footsteps weren't coming from anyone in our group. I instantly felt my stomach drop and looked over to see that my tent mate had noticed the noise and light too. At such a late hour in the middle of the woods, hearing footsteps coming toward you was not a good feeling. She whispered to me, "What the hell is that noise?" And fear shook her quiet voice. "I don't know, but it's freaking me out," I replied, hushing my voice even quieter. I grabbed a tent stake lying next to my sleeping bag and gripped it tightly. The noises got louder and louder until it was clear that someone or something was standing directly in front of our tent. My heart dropped as I heard the nylon crinkle on our rain tarp. At this point, my friend and I were paralyzed with fear, gripping each other's hands fiercely. I noticed that there was 100% more than just one light, and it seemed that whoever was out there was circling our tent, flashlights in hand. I heard hushed voices but couldn't make out anything, still gripping my tiny metal tent stake as tight as I could. I thought I heard our zipper sound off, when with the adrenaline coursing through my body, I slapped the side of my tent as hard as I could and gave a rough-sounding humph, my hand coming in contact with what felt like a human leg, but quickly the chorus of footsteps moved away from our tent. My friend and I were terrified and watched wide-eyed as the lights grew more and more distant. Neither of us slept at all the rest of the night, whispering about whether or not we should get our guides. Thankfully, the noises and the light didn't come back, and I fell asleep from boredom, though I was still scared out of my mind. In the morning, my stake still in hand, I went out to see if I could find any footprints. To my horror, there was a mass of boot prints in the loose dirt, and they became scattered from the other direction. What scared me the most was that the tree directly in front of my tent read, "Hello," marked into the wood with a knife. My heart sank again, and I looked over to the other campsite. Though it was barely 7 in the morning, the college kids had moved on and left behind only the knife-carved message. Maybe they were just some boys trying to flirt with us or scare a couple of high school girls. But either way, the fact that they brought a knife over to our tent scares me greatly. I am still terrified to this day about what those boys could have done had I not slapped one of their legs, and what could have happened if we hadn't woken up and been aware of the situation. Something just tells me they weren't with the best intentions. I worked in a toy shop for a couple of years, and as you can imagine, Christmas was a pretty intense time for all of us who worked the holiday shifts. It was impossible to get that job without being an intensely enthusiastic, happy, smiley kind of person. Like 80% of the staff were entertainers or had come from some kind of performance background, and we were living the dream, so to speak. We were actually getting paid to play with toys, joke with kids, and above all, Christmas was the best time of the year for that. A toy shop at Christmas time has such a magical feeling about it, especially if all of the staff have Christmas spirit about them. Now, our store was hugely into Christmas, to the point where our smart casual uniforms even had Assistants to Santa Claus, or Santa's Little Helpers, or other variations written in big writing over the back. This, of course, led to some fantastic interactions with kids, asking about if we had met them and things like that. Being the only staff member who had actually worked with children for years, these questions were normally sent my way to be answered, because I always had one ready. So that's the backstory out of the way. One weekday, at an oddly quiet moment, I was on my own on the shop floor, while the other staff members restocked after the afternoon rush. A boy comes in, unaccompanied, must have been about 9 or 10, smiles briefly at me, and then starts walking around. I give him a couple of minutes to take a look at things, before asking him if he wants to play with this new air-powered rocket launcher that we had. "No thanks. I know Santa. I don't need your help," he replies flatly. This was mildly unusual, but hey, he seemed to be a pretty sweet kid otherwise. Unfortunately, I don't know much in there that would have been good for a kid his age. I figure it'll probably be his dad or someone paying for it, so I start showing him some kind of limited stuff that would be suitable for some of the older kids. I show him a few things, and he sees something he likes. This big massage slipper. It's one big slipper that you put both feet into, and it has various massage settings. Not the kind of thing I'd have imagined him to pick out, but a fairly cool gift nonetheless. So he asks how much it is, and I tell him it's like $20 or whatever the price was. He then instantly looks angry and frustrated. "Is that a bit too expensive, bud?" I ask, keeping the tone friendly. I don't want this kid to be upset, and he nods. So I show him some other things, and he starts getting more and more difficult to deal with. He's frowning, breathing all heavy through his nose, like he's building up to some kind of temper tantrum. He starts telling me again how he knows Santa, how Santa gives toys away to good kids, and doesn't ask for money in return. I just calmly explain that I can't just give stuff away for free, and then politely leave him to browse the rest of the toys. A couple more minutes go by. I'm just sitting by the cash register reading a book, since the store is so quiet. It's only me and the kid, with my manager up in the office. I remember looking up from my book, and the kid is at the register just staring up at me, with this angry look on his face. Once again, I apologize and explain to the kid that as much as I'd like to, I can't just give stock away, otherwise I'll get fired. "Your boss is mean," the kid says, seething with anger at this point. Now, this probably wasn't the best thing to do, but since the kid was so on the money with his little statement, my boss was indeed an asshole, I just laughed. Like, not hysterically, just like this little involuntary giggle. The kid does not take this well. He thinks I'm laughing at him. "Why are you laughing at me?" he asks, practically shaking with rage. I begin to explain that I'm not actually laughing at him, but I soon realize it's not getting through to him. He just storms out of the store, disappearing among the crowds of middle-aged women that are clogging up the mall. As the afternoon draws on, the store gets a little busier, and I get to actually do some work. Like I said, the work was fun, so it was never a problem. Being busy meant the hours go quicker, which means I get to go home quicker. Win-win. So I make a few sales, get to test out some of the fancy new Nerf guns we had in store, and the weird kid eventually just slips from my mind. Nothing remotely eventful happens for the rest of the day, right up until closing time, when I'm starting to close the store down. Someone is standing at the register. I look up from my worksheet, and it's the kid. I give him a cheery enough greeting, hoping the kid's mood has improved. But it hasn't. Instead, it's gotten worse. "You're mean too," he hisses. "Look, I'm sorry, kid, but where are your parents?" I ask. But the kid refuses to answer. He just glares at me again. "Kid, where are your parents? I don't want to have to call mall security, but you can't be wandering around on your own, okay?" "He knows when you are sleeping," the kid mutters. I roll my eyes, but the way he says it has me really creeped out. "He knows when you're awake. He knows when you've been really bad." "Where are your parents, kid?" I ask again, trying to remain calm. "The North Pole." "Very funny, but seriously, you gotta go. The store is closing." "He's gonna climb down your chimney covered in soot, all while you're asleep," the kid said. I didn't say a word in reply. "He'll know when you're asleep, and he'll be able to creep right up next to your bed." I reach for the store's phone, dialing the mall security short number. I try not to listen to the kid, but I can't help but hear his words over the phone's dial tone. "He's gonna stuff your mouth with coal until you choke and die." I turn, ready to scream at this creepy little brat. It's one thing to be a spoiled kid. It's another to say such creepy, threatening things to someone who's only trying to help. But when I turn around, the kid is gone. Not a sign of him, even outside the store in the emptying mall. I've only told this story a handful of times, but it never fails to creep me out. The idea of a kid having such a skewed idea of Santa as some weird avenging angel, having such a warped view of the holiday season, never, ever fails to make my skin crawl. Back when it was originally released, I really wanted to get my hands on the new Xbox One. You know the one. It was 4K, ready with a considerably faster processor. So naturally, I tried absolutely everything in my power to get one as immediately as I could. My local Walmart was having one of those Black Friday sales, and like so many others, I stood patiently in line, waiting to try and beat the rush to grab one. But I was nowhere near sprightly or fortunate enough to actually get one that way. So after failing to get one in person, I then tried getting one online. But as rapidly as I wanted one to own, the users who were reselling them were asking way too much money, and I simply couldn't afford to shell out double or sometimes triple the price. After weeks of trying to find a way to get a hold of one, I had come to the conclusion that it just wasn't to be. It was then that I had something of a stroke of luck. Although I had resorted to Craigslist in my desperation, I did actually find someone that was selling their Xbox One at no more than the original buying price of the console. Naturally, I was skeptical as hell. For the life of me, I simply couldn't fathom why they would do something like that. But one thought overrode all others. If I didn't put in a bid now, someone else would, and I could kiss my chance at owning an Xbox One goodbye. I immediately emailed the seller and let them know that I was very interested. Not only that, but I had the cash on hand and ready to go. I also offered to pay for gas or whatever it would take to get the console delivered to my door. I figured that would be a pretty appealing offer to someone who I guessed was just strapped for cash around the holidays. I was stunned to get an almost instantaneous response, stating that they did still have the Xbox and were in fact still waiting for a proper bid from a serious buyer. They politely asked for a delivery address so they could bring it over as soon as possible. I was sort of hesitant to divulge such personal information and asked if it would be a better idea to first meet in public, since it was much safer that way. I'll be honest, I wasn't too pleased with the idea of a total stranger coming to my house, but he informed me that he was going to be very busy running holiday errands all day and that there would only be some pretty specific windows of opportunity to drop it off. It would be much more convenient for him if he was able to come to my house. I was still not particularly ecstatic about the idea, but oh man, I really wanted that Xbox. So, in the end, I agreed and texted the dude my home address. I figured it was safer than me going over to his place. At least this way, I'd be on my home turf. I was so happy and eager to get my hands on that new console that excitement only grew as I began waiting for the guy to turn up. But he took his sweet goddamn time. I mean, hours and hours passed by before I began to suspect that he wasn't going to actually show up. Around 1 in the afternoon, 4 hours after he was due, I was seriously losing my cool, thinking it was a prank or something. I tried texting the guy back, asking him where he was. Previously, I had gotten pretty timely responses from the guy, but this time, I didn't hear a single thing from him. By 6 that evening, I just lost all hope. I assumed that he had gotten a better offer from someone else, and didn't have the heart to tell me that he'd picked a new buyer. I was disappointed, more than words can possibly describe. I had gotten myself so psyched, and I can't even tell you how deflated I was. It's one thing to not have gotten the item from the store. I could come to terms with that. But I was so close to having one in my hands. It sucked having my hopes dashed so cruelly like that. But that didn't mean I'd given up entirely. So, for the rest of the night, I kept looking around on Craigslist and other sites to find an Xbox One that was within my price range. But as I was getting ready to wind down for bed, I heard something. At first I dismissed it as the wind or something, that it was maybe just my imagination. But then I heard it again. Someone was knocking, not at my front door, but lightly on the TV room window. I walked up to the bedroom window and peered out into the driveway, seeing this strange-looking dude at my front door, looking around as if checking if the coast was clear. I'm suspicious, but I go downstairs to see what he wants. He identified himself as the guy who had the Xbox, apologized for being so late, and explained that he had gotten backtracked with errands during his day. Then, he casually asked if I still had the money. I opened the door all the way, but still kept the screen door closed as a precaution. Something just didn't feel right. Like, at all. I told him that yeah, I still had the cash on me, but I didn't see that he had anything with him. So I calmly asked if he brought the Xbox with him, like if it's still in his car or something. As I expected, he told me it was out in his van. He told me to get the money and come out to the van with him, and he would get it for me. I let him know I wasn't really comfortable walking out to his van, but he seems to understand, and tells me that it was all good. I briefly look over the guy's shoulder and see that there is in fact someone else sitting there in the van. Not only that, but the dude at my door had been keeping his hands concealed in the little front pouch of his hoodie the whole time while talking to me, and there was definitely something more than just his hands in there. Don't ask me how I could tell. I just could. You know when you just get a gut feeling about something? Yeah, that. I tried to stay as chill as possible as I lied to him that I was just going to go fetch my wallet and return in a minute. His mood immediately changed as I closed the door in his face before locking it. I then make the split-second decision, better to be safe than sorry, so I pull my phone out of my shorts and dial 911. But as I do, I heard a loud thud on my front door. Then the sound of the van's engine revving before it zooms off into the night. When I went to check and see if he damaged my door, I nearly pissed my pants when I saw a rusty old hatchet buried in the wood. I was right that he had something in his sweatshirt, and that I shouldn't go out to the van with him. Be careful who you're buying from, folks. You never know who's behind the username.
"4 years ago, I was waiting in a busy train station for my friend to arrive as we were going to a movie together. I was standing by the clock where we agreed to meet when a police officer approached me, and this is how the dialogue went, more or less.
What's a pretty woman doing all by herself here on this fine day?
I'm just waiting for a friend.
Oh, your boyfriend.
No, my friend.
Oh, do you have a boyfriend? Do you want one?
No thank you, I'm not interested. Besides, I'm into my prom date.
But we would be great together.
That's not legal, I'm still in high school, and a minor.
I don't believe you. Let me see your license.
I don't think that's appropriate.
What? You don't trust me, but I'm a cop.
Okay. Here, hand him my ID.
Oh, you live in? I live there. Let me drive you home later.
I'm sorry, I don't really feel comfortable with that. I don't know you.
Give me your phone number.
Why? I don't feel comfortable doing that.
Unlock your phone and give it to me, or I'll arrest you for loitering.
At this point, I genuinely freaked out. I didn't know if he could actually do that. And me, being dumb, gave him my unlocked phone. And he called himself and saved my number. After that, he texted me repeatedly, to which I told him to leave me alone, and that it was highly inappropriate, that he was flirting with a minor, and that, if need be, I will use these texts as proof if he threatens to harass me. And he responds telling me that's a bad move, and that he knows where I live. And then I blocked his number, and he left me alone. Fast forward to a few months from then. He somehow finds me on Facebook, even though my account wasn't linked to my number, and starts messaging me, to which I once again respond, this is the last warning, and that he better leave me alone, or I'll report him, to which he told me I won't be a minor forever, and I blocked him. So, to the police officer who used his authority to make me uncomfortable and gave him my number, please do not reach out to me again. I look back now and cringe at the fact that I was so stupid and thought that he could have gotten away with arresting me for loitering. But yeah, it was definitely very uncomfortable. I began babysitting at 13 to earn extra money to spend on horribly embarrassing things like Fall Out Boy CDs. I almost always worked for my dad's clients. He is a lawyer and get referred by word of mouth. I was babysitting for this one family who had a little girl, 9, and a little boy, 7. The parents seemed okay, if a tad crotchety, giving me a full schedule to follow, and jokingly threatening to beat up any boy who might mysteriously show up after they left. It felt cruel for them to accuse me of even knowing a boy given I basically looked like an overgrown baby with frizzy hair at that age. Almost immediately after the parents leave, the little girl sings in a creepy, high-pitched voice. We're all alone now. Rightio, cue the Shining soundtrack. I know, the little boy chimed in. Let's play rape. Looking back now, I know the kid probably just heard the term on TV, knew the word was shocking, and said it just for a reaction. I totally bought into it at the time, sputtering wide-eyed and changing the subject quickly. These kids were hell for the next hour. I wouldn't let them watch South Park on the TV, because their parents did not seem like the type to allow their precious 7 and 9-year-old to watch a show like that. As soon as I said no, the little girl said casually, "Oh, that's fine. We'll just go play the PlayStation in the family room. Feel free to watch it out here." LOL, nope. I knew exactly where this was headed. I said they could watch any other TV show in the living room while I made them dinner. The parents had left them instructions to make them sandwiches. I could handle that. Before I had even got out the bread, I hear a massive crash. It seems like the little girl has broken a glass. Toting and pissed, but ultimately with no way to punish her, I cleaned it up, while these two incredibly weird kids watched with wide eyes. Dumping the glass in the trash, I went back to making the sandwiches. I'm a vegetarian, so while the kids had chicken, I made a simple salad one for myself. Just as I was finishing, the little boy screamed out, even from my hyper-vigilant state, as an accountable teenage babysitter. Sounded like a pantheon of pain. Nonetheless, I ran over to the couch in the living room to check on him. "My ankle!" he howled, dramatically flopping back into the couch. While I tried to figure out how he had hurt his ankle, the little girl slipped out of the room. Peripherally, I was aware of this, but didn't really pay it any mind. Focus on this little boy pretending to be in pain. He kept saying, "I want to stand, but it hurts too much. I don't know." Over and over, until his eyes suddenly flickered to just behind me, where I could see the little girl standing with a protruding smile on her face. He was miraculously healed. Yeah, praise the Lord. At this point, I was just thinking, these kids were really weird. Craved attention a little too much, and probably needed more parental involvement. Whatever, I was 13 and that $60 was only 4 hours away. I set out the sandwiches for the two to eat at the dining table, went to get a soda, and returned. After pouring soda for the both of them, I realized they hadn't even taken a bite of their sandwiches yet. I asked them what they were waiting for. They smiled. "For you to take a bite of yours." I'm so glad. I had a gut feeling to open the top part of the bread of my sandwich, because when I did, I saw glass, broken glass that I put in the trash. I stared in horror at the two kids staring at me with menacing twin grins. I lost it, shouting, "Are you serious? At the very least, you could have injured my mouth. What's wrong with you two?" Instead of crying or apologizing or pretending to be ashamed or confused, these two little effers began laughing. Not like kids. It was too low. It wasn't that silly, free laugh kids laugh. It was low and threatening. I'll never forget that noise. My immediate reaction was, these kids are too young to be laughing like that. I called my older sister, who was 17 at the time, cried about what had happened. And she came and took over for me. We left the house with chills. After the parents arrived, I never babysat for those two again. What I can't get past is the level of premeditation. that went into sprinkling that broken glass in my sandwich. In the totally remorseless way they responded to my getting upset. They were unlike any two kids I've ever met before. I went to college in New Orleans a couple years before Hurricane Katrina. I was a senior when it hit. During my first year, I had no car, so I had to take the bus everywhere. One afternoon, I went shopping in a not-so-great part of town, New Orleans East. Not particularly bad, but kind of poor and a little seedy. Even though I was a young woman walking around the city alone, I never really felt unsafe. Well, that was about to change. I had a couple of shopping bags and was waiting at the bus stop, ready to go back to my dorm. At this time of day, this was fairly desolate stretch of road. There were 2 buses that passed by the stop, but one every hour at the most. I had a bit of a wait ahead of me. The stop was near a levee, dirt embankment, meant to keep the water from the lake or river out of the city, the things that broke when Katrina hit. Behind the levee were only train tracks and water. Pretty much I was standing on a deserted road in a crummy part of town with nothing but water, pavement, and railroad tracks. I felt okay though. I had my cell phone. It was still light out, and the bus would be along eventually. I waited, and waited, and waited. No bus. Then I heard a voice behind me. I turned and saw a boy coming over the levee and walking towards me. He was about 10, so I wasn't really leery of him, as I would have been of a grown man. I was a good foot taller, at least. I didn't know where he had came from, as there weren't any houses anywhere near the direction he'd come from. Railroad tracks and a big lake were all that were there. He wasn't waiting on the bus. He came up to me and started asking what was in the bags, and if I'd show him. Typical kid, I guess. Kind of strange, but not too creepy. I tried to brush him off and ignore him. It didn't work. He started grabbing for the bags and being more insistent that I give him something. I didn't have anything that would interest a kid. Just some clothes and groceries. He refused to leave though. Then it got creepy. He started to grab at me, not the bags. He started rubbing his hips against my leg and trying to hug me or dry hump me. I was thoroughly grossed out and tried to walk away. He walked with me and tried to jump up and kiss me. Ugh, he was a kid. This was a way too sexual behavior for a kid. Too sexual for anyone at a bus stop. I looked around for anyone who could help, but there wasn't anyone. I could have walked back to the stores, but then I'd missed the bus. I decided to just walk down the road to the next stop, hoping the kid would go back home or wherever it was he came from. That's when he decided to grab me again by the arm and try to pull me up to the levee. Oh no, I pushed him off me, loath to touch him. He was sticky, as kids tend to be, and sweaty, plus he's a creeper, but still a kid. I was a little bigger than he was, and I didn't want to hurt him. He told me that I should come to his house, which was apparently on the other side of the levee, as he pointed. I don't think so. No one builds a house on the water side of a levee. Levees are built to keep water away from the houses. You couldn't possibly live on the other side of it. I wasn't going anywhere with this kid, so I kept walking. He followed me, still insisting that I come to his house. He said no one was home, and there was a bed, and we could have sex. What? I was 19 at the time, and he looked to be about 10. Luckily, my boyfriend called my cell phone, and the kid seemed to take that a little more seriously than my method of shoving and yelling at him. Good, because I was about ready to hurt him just to get away. I stayed on the phone with my boyfriend and told him what the kid was doing. I don't know why it never occurred to me to call the cops. I guess because it's New Orleans, and cops don't show up too quickly, unless it's a quarter. The kid ran up to the levee, back where he'd came from, and disappeared. I walked down to the next bus stop, maybe about 1/4 mile from the original stop. As I waited, praying a bus would come soon, I heard rocks hitting the pavement. I turned and saw the kid crouching on the levee, throwing rocks at me. I had been annoyed and creeped out before, but this was starting to actually get dangerous. They were good-sized rocks and sharp. A few minutes later, the bus came, and I got on it. It wasn't the right one, but I didn't care at this point. I took a ride to the casino, about a mile or two down the road, where the driver let me get a transfer to the right bus. I made it back to my dorm room and never went back to that part of town alone again. I kind of wonder what the deal was, though. I don't know if the kid had issues, or what would have happened if I had gone with him to his house on the other side of the levee. For all I knew, there could have been a group of guys back there, using the kid to lure me out of sight, so they could do God knows what to me. I'm 29 now. The story happened 10 years ago. At the time, I was jobless, and I found a job as a security guard in an office building. The office building was in a forest area, away from many busy streets, like secluded. The person who had the job before me had a car accident and apparently was paralyzed from the waist down. Nobody was interested in the job since he worked during the night, and the office building was so big, it was just boring as hell. But hey, a job is a job. Once I started, a supervisor worked me in for a week, what to do, etc. This was my first night working by myself. I came to work and took my shift over from my colleague at 9 p.m. He told me there were still some people left in the building. Before I went up to the 15th floor, I closed the main entrance in such a way you can only exit when you're inside, so no outsiders could come in. After I did this, I went up to the 15th floor, where these people still worked too. I asked them if they needed to go anywhere else in the building. If not, I could make my round and close off all the other floors, which I did. So I made my rounds and found nothing peculiar. I went back to my front desk. This was around 11:30 p.m., and the last people who were working on the 15th floor were just leaving. And then a guy told me he was the last one to leave and wished me a good night. Once the last person left, I went up to the 15th floor, checked all the offices, and locked it down. I went down to my front desk again, since there were no people left. I put on the alarms, which work on motion detection, and also when you open a fire exit, on every floor except the ground floor, where my desk was. Within 5 minutes, I put the alarm on all the floors, and the alarm went off on the 10th floor, and there was nobody in the building. The rule is, if an alarm goes off, you first call the security company before you take action. I told them I would investigate the alarm, and I would call them back once I checked it out. Otherwise, if I don't call back, they would send a police car to check it out, just as a precaution. I checked the whole 10th floor, and I found nothing. Went back to call the security company, telling them it was a false alarm. I kid you not, the alarm on the 10th floor went off like 7 times in an hour, and every time I checked the floor, I couldn't find anything out of order, or even that there was someone there. Since this was my first day working alone, and the alarm went off so many times, the security company thought I was screwing things up and wanted to file a complaint to my boss, which would mean I would lose my job I just had for a week. In retrospect, the following was the dumbest thing I could ever do. Because the alarm went off again, since I didn't want to call the security company again and cry wolf, I went up to the 10th floor without informing the security company. The only thing I had on me was a mag light. Since security guards in the Netherlands are not allowed to carry guns, I went up to the 10th floor, checked the floor, and as before, found nothing. The only difference now was I pretended to leave, turned off the lights, and stayed on the 10th floor, listening if someone was there. In about 5 minutes, I heard someone or something moving. I was relieved and anxious at the same time. Relieved I wasn't wrong, anxious because of what was on the floor. I turned on the lights and tried to sound as manly as possible, saying something in the line of, "I know you're there. I know there's someone here. Show yourself." As you can imagine, no response. So stupid I didn't go down to call for help, but stupid me went looking to whatever it was I heard on the 10th floor. I walked to the office I heard the sound from, turned on the lights, and found a little girl who couldn't be older than 13, with long brown hair in white pajamas, squatting and rocking front to back on a desk, looking straight at me. The scary thing was, there was no emotion in her face or in her eyes. After almost crapping myself, I collected my nerves and took the girl by the hand. Like, what can a girl do to a 6'8" tall guy? I took her down to the front desk, offered her a Coke, but she didn't respond whatsoever. The only thing I could do was call my supervisor and told him about what I had encountered. My supervisor's response was, "Stay there, I'll be right over." The time I hung up the phone until my supervisor came, I just had this underbelly feeling with this girl that there was something really wrong with her. Before my supervisor turned up, he called me and told me to call an asylum, which was pretty close to the office building I worked at, just to check if someone was missing. Why would there be a 13-year-old girl in an office building with no houses nearby whatsoever? So that's what I did. I called the asylum, asking them if there was someone missing from the asylum. I got the scariest response you can get. They told me, yes, as a matter of fact, someone is missing. I gave them a description of the girl sitting next to me, and it was in fact the girl who was missing from the asylum. They told me she was really dangerous, and that I should watch my back at all cost. They immediately sent people over to take the little girl with them. A week later, my supervisor told me the story of the girl I found, since he talked with the people from the asylum. It turns out the girl killed her mom and dad and little brother whilst they were asleep when she was 11. Even in the asylum, she wounded staff members, either by stabbing them with a pencil or, in another case, biting a piece of a ear off. To this day, we still have no clue how she ever came in the building. We checked all the cameras, and there was no footage of her ever entering the building. The story goes way back, before I was born. My uncle told us the story one Christmas day, when I was like 7 years old. He told us that when he and his work friends went to a bar to relax after a hard day at work, he saw the scariest thing in his entire life. All his friends went home before him, and he stayed back to drink more. It was already passing midnight, and he had to walk home. It was dark, and it was a long way. When he got near to the ravine, he saw a lady in white, weeping and crying, looking down, standing at the edge of the ravine. So he said, "Are you okay? Be careful, you're going to fall." But she did not say a word. My uncle described her. He said she was wearing a long white dress, and she had no feet, actually floating in the air. He could only see her back. After a few seconds, my uncle felt really bad, and he started backing up. Her weeping became louder and louder. Then she turned around and my uncle screamed. Her face was indescribable. She had horse legs. She was part human and part animal. After that, he never walked alone at midnight around the ravine. He said that at night he could hear her weeping softly in the air. And he still gets chills down his spine. People say that when you hear the weeping woman far, far away, she is right outside your house or near you. When you hear her really close and loud, it is because she is far away. My mom is first-generation American. Her parents moved from Chihuahua, Mexico, to El Paso, Texas, before she was born. The supernatural was very prevalent in both sides of our family. My grandfather claims that we are descendants from the Apache warlord, Victorio, and that the spirit of Victorio appeared to him and his brothers when he was a young man. My mom had many experiences with ghosts and spirits, but she said that none was more terrifying than her experience with La Leona. Her family lived in a decent-sized house on the banks of a canal on the south side of El Paso. At the time, the family had 3 dogs. My mom describes all of them as the toughest dogs on the block. One night in the dead of winter, my grandfather was telling my mom one of his many great stories when there was a loud commotion in the front yard where the dogs were. The dogs were barking to wake the dead. My mom and her dad went outside to the front to see what was going on. They were joined by my grandmother. They had not noticed this before, but a fog was slowly creeping around the street. The air was chill, but different from the cold of winter. The cold went down to the very bone. The 3 dogs were barking towards the fog, or more accurately, toward the canal that was by the house. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night air. My mom described it as the most terrifying cry she has heard in her entire life. She says that it lasted for a full minute, before finally dissipating. When the scream left, the fog lifted, and the dogs returned to the way they were before. My mom asked her dad what the scream was, but all he said was, "La Leona," and told her to go to bed. Naturally, she couldn't sleep, and instead listened to her parents debate over whether or not to call the cops and report a murder or something. In the morning, when it was light out, my grandfather went down to the canal, but unsurprisingly found nothing. When he came back, he told my mom the legend of the woman who drowned her own children and is now fated to cry out for them on the banks of the river where she killed them. And to this day, my mom is convinced that she heard La Leona on that night so many years ago. Another close associate of mine who has had a close encounter with La Leona is my former karate instructor and confirmation class teacher. He's Irish and a devoted Catholic, but firmly believes in the existence of ghosts and the paranormal. When he was a teenager, he lived in New Mexico, close to the borders with Texas and Mexico. Like any good teenager looking for a rush, he liked to ride around with his brothers after dark and watch for ghosts in the old graveyards. One night, he and his brothers managed to convince a couple of girls they were sweet on to come along. They were sitting in the car in the middle of the desert when a deep fog started setting in. They were unsettled and decided to leave, but the car wouldn't start. Suddenly, he says that everything went completely and utterly pitch black, like someone had thrown a tarp over the car. My friend flipped, but both his brothers were frozen in their seats, unable to move a muscle. He yelled, but they still didn't move. He reached over and managed to finally start the car. He was 15 and didn't even have a license, but he drove out of there like a bat out of hell. When his heart finally stopped racing, he stopped the car. He turned to his brother and asked him what the hell happened back there. His brother, with his face still wide, asked him incredulously, "Jim, did you not see her?" He shook his head no, and asked his brother what he was talking about. He told his brother that when everything had gone black, a strange, translucent, white woman appeared outside of the car. She looked like a wicked witch. She reached her hand into the car, through the closed window for Jim's neck, but stopped and drew back when she touched it. She then disappeared, and that was when the car started. Jim reached up to his neck and fingered the St. Michael medallion he always wore. He firmly believed that the archangel responsible for defeating Satan protected him on that night. Whether the spirit was a demon, La Leona, or some other frightful specter does not matter. Jim is firmly convinced that it was La Leona, and that she was stopped from whatever evil she intended. And he never stops praying to St. Michael. This happened to me when I was about 11 years old. It was the 90s. I have lived my whole life in El Paso, Texas. The culture is rich in folklore and religious beliefs. Many Hispanic families have stories of the paranormal. One legend popular, the legend of La Leona, Spanish for the weeping woman, has been a part of Hispanic culture in the Southwest since the days of conquistadors. The tall, thin spirit is said to be blessed with natural beauty, long, flowing black hair. Wearing a white gown, she roams the rivers and creeks, wailing into the night and searching for children to drag, screaming into a watery grave. No one really knows when the legend of La Leona began or from where it originated, though the tales vary from source to source. The one common thread is that she is the spirit of a doomed mother who drowned her children and now spends eternity searching for them in rivers and lakes. One night, just like any other night, I lived in a trailer with my mom and dad. My youngest brother was staying with my aunt this night. I fell asleep watching Jay Leno as usual, and when I woke up, I was on the sofa in my living room. The time was 4 a.m., which illuminated from the stove in the kitchen. The television was off, and normally I had a light on, but this time it was pitch black. I woke up and I heard a horrible screaming that was coming from far in the distance. The screaming was coming from a ditch that was a few feet away from my house. I heard it, and I thought I was hearing things. I asked myself, am I dreaming? And I started to hear the animals outside, howling and whimpering. These animals that I speak of are cats and dogs. As the screaming got closer, the animals continued to cry. The screaming was something I have never experienced ever before. It sounded like I was in a big hallway, and a woman was screaming her guts out down that hallway. Then, in all the screaming, I started to make out words. These words being said by whoever this was at 4 a.m., screaming their guts out, shocked me. The woman said, "Ah, mijos. Oh, my children." In a huge panic, I quickly got up from the sofa, ran to the kitchen, which was right next to where I was asleep. I turned on the closest light and looked around. The screaming didn't stop. In fact, the screaming only got louder and closer. I questioned my sanity at that moment. Was I going crazy or hearing things? Then I thought to myself, this is real, and the animals are responding to it in a negative way. So I did what any other 11-year-old boy would do in a moment like this. I ran to my mom and dad's room. I reached for my mom and shook her awake wildly. She woke up slowly, and to my amazement, the screaming faded away. As she woke awake, I thought to myself, what the heck is going on? I told my mother, "Mom, do you hear that screaming and crying lady?" My mom was half asleep, and she said, "Go back to sleep. It is most likely your imagination." I told her, "No, this is real. Please listen. Don't you hear her?" My mom quickly just said, "You're dreaming, so go back to sleep. It's going to be okay." By then, the screaming had faded away, like if whoever was screaming knew that an adult is awake. I was terrified as I returned to the living room and quickly turned on the television as I left most of the lights on as well. I didn't go back to sleep until the sun came up. I couldn't believe what I heard and witnessed. I was treated like a crazy person whenever I told my story. It got so bad that I kept my experience to myself. To this day, I don't care what people think of my experience. I know what I heard. A couple of years later, it happened to me again. But that's a whole other story that I will share later. This story takes place after the first incident with the woman known as La Leona. Not much happened after the first time I heard her. An incident occurred with my aunt about a year after my encounter. According to my aunt, they were sleeping, and suddenly there was a horrible sound coming from the ditch located in front of their house. There's a street in between the ditch and the house, but her house and the ditch are really close to one another. It was about 2:30 a.m. when my aunt was awakened by a screaming woman coming from the ditch. She figured maybe someone was being hurt or attacked. She walked out of the front yard, looking towards the ditch, and saw there was no woman. My cousin, her daughter, walked out the front as well, asking what was happening. My aunt, of course, had no idea. As the screaming grew closer, then they saw her, a woman in a white dress. The only thing that shook them to the bone was the woman had no feet and was clearly floating. One other feature that threw them off was that the woman had no face. They both just turned after seeing that and ran inside their house. My aunt locked the door and called the police. The police showed up minutes later and took their claim seriously. El Paso PD was soon looking at the area where this woman was seen and heard screaming. The police soon returned and said there was no evidence that a woman was there. They looked at the area where the woman was seen walking, and not even footprints were found. One of the police officers even asked if maybe my aunt was dreaming everything that happened. The next day is when I went over to visit, and I saw my cousin like I have never seen her before. She had black bags under her eyes, and she hasn't slept since the incident. I asked her what happened, and she said she saw what my aunt saw, the screaming woman with no feet and no face. It took her a while to sleep normal again. She never heard or saw La Leona again, but to this day, she won't deny that she witnessed something she can't explain. Unlike my cousin, I don't have the luck of avoiding La Leona. It was in the early 2000s when I worked here in El Paso, Texas, at a local supermarket named Big 8. One of the shifts I worked was 3 a.m. to 12 p.m. The store was located in the lower valley of El Paso. In the back of the store is a small ditch. One early morning, at about 4 a.m., I heard the back doors open when I was taking the empty milk crates outside in the back. I was working with 2 other guys at the time of this incident. One of the guys, named R, thought it would be funny to close the back doors and lock me outside as a joke. When I heard the doors close shut, I knew he was just messing around. I thought to myself, I'll just stay quiet and wait for him to open the doors again. I wasn't going to give in to his joke of trying to scare me. I stood by the doors, smiling and thinking to myself, he's not going to scare me. I could hear R laughing on the other side of the doors, and I thought to myself, well, the joke is on him because I'm not scared. About 1 minute later, in the far distance, I heard screaming. I heard, ah! And I thought to myself, it's the same screaming that I heard when I was 11 years old. The screaming got louder and closer to me. I felt a chill down my spine, and I felt that I was being watched by some unseen force. I felt a sense of hopelessness. It was a feeling unlike any other. I started pounding on the door. Let me in! There is somebody out here. I pounded my fist and started kicking the door. What the F? Let me in. I could hear R laughing on the other side of the door. I started to kick the door harder. The screaming was now coming from the right and back of me. Just then, R opened the door and said, "What the F is that?" Just then, I ran inside and locked the warehouse door. R said, "Why was the lady screaming? Did she need help?" I told him, I don't think that was a lady. I told him what had happened to me when I was younger. R told me, "Jay, don't you think maybe you're cursed, or she is following you?" I stayed quiet when he told me that. I couldn't work my shift normally after that. It took a few hours to get over what happened. I admit I was scared. And maybe R was right. What if she was following me? There is one more incident that took place right after. In 2015, I started working as a custodian at Cedar Grove Elementary. Behind the school is a border highway, then the Rio Grande, of course, covered by a huge metal fence that separates Mexico from El Paso. I worked the night shift from 2:30 p.m. to 11 p.m. One night, I was stuck with another custodian until midnight. Right when we were about to leave, we do a walkthrough of the school to make sure all the doors are locked on the outside. I worked with another custodian, named C. C always told me that he has never believed in ghosts. Up until that night, I can say. We walked to our cars, and just as I was about to leave, I saw that C had opened his hood of his car. Then he asked me, "Hey Jay, can you give me a jump? My car battery is dead." I told him yes, of course. Just as I stepped out my car, a loud screaming came from the Rio Grande. All the animals in the nearby neighborhood started howling and crying. Once again, the screaming resembled a woman screaming her guts out in a hallway as it echoed all over. C looked at me and said, "Oh my God, is that a demon?" I told him no. "C, that is La Leona." He looked right at me and said, "No way, she can't be real." Then I said, "I have heard her before." Then C said, "Hurry, please, and let's get out of here." I gave him a jump, and just then we saw a border patrol jeep speeding towards a screaming woman. Just then I thought to myself, I can record this and share it with the world. I took my phone out, and just as I record, the screaming faded away. C and I looked at each other, and he said, "What the F? Sorry, Jay. I'm leaving before that evil witch comes back to get us." We both left, and the very next day, C was telling everybody at work how he heard the witch crying the night before. That was the last time I encountered her. I don't think it is the last, as I feel that she may choose who hears her or sees her.
Sitting here in quarantine really had me thinking about my past, and there's lots of let's not meet in there, but none of them have left me scared to this day quite like this one. I was maybe 8 years old, and it was near Christmas, sometime during mid-December, and had just gotten home with my mom and sister from seeing Santa. My mom had put some music on the TV. This is ingrained in my memory. I can remember the music video had purple butterflies, and it was a country song by a pretty lady with dark brown hair. I wish I could think of the song, but I can just see the video, and ran upstairs to go to the bathroom. I heard someone knocking, and being the big brain of operations, I told my sister to go tell my mommy while I answered the door. It was a man, tall and skinny, with a huge bright smile on his face, and this toy in his hand. It was a remote-controlled racetrack with 2 cars, and he looked around the living room behind me and said, "Merry Christmas. This is for you and your sister. I'm donating toys to all the kids in the neighborhood. And this is the last house. I have so many toys left, I'll need help carrying them." He pointed over his shoulder to this beat-up little gold car with a lot of big bags in the trunk and some toys in the back seat. Was a small dog and a little tricycle and car seat. It was ecstatic. You know how exciting that is as a kid, because we were so poor that we hadn't even really been able to decorate the house. Thanks, Mom, that heroin money could have bought a tree instead of the bush you got from our yard. My sister came down the stairs, and I told her to hold the toy, and that I would be right back. I ran the stairs 2 at a time, trying to get my shoes and coat on. I couldn't wait for the real Christmas. I was going to get a puppy, and my sister a bike, and maybe he had clothes in there for my mommy, and Ty, her boyfriend. I hollered out to my mom through the bathroom door that I was going to help the nice man bring our presents from the car. I was almost into his arms when my mom made it down the stairs. She snatched me back and told me to lock the doors behind her and take my sister somewhere safe. I had designated hiding spots in case her and her man would fight, or my grandma would come over to take us. We hid in a crawl space for what felt like years before I heard my mom say it was safe. As a 23-year-old looking back, he was 100% trying to kidnap me and my sister. So, Mr. Christmas Cheer, please, let's not meet again. So this is about something that messed me up pretty bad. I was at a local high school football game and decided to leave early. I live close to the school, so I walked home. I noticed someone walking behind me the same way, which was a little weird. It's a small neighborhood and we sort of all knew each other, and this guy was not familiar. He was an older guy, and he was wearing a tuxedo. He just kept smiling at me, and I continued to walk home, and he kept following me, a bit behind, but definitely following. I got to my house and he stopped at the end of the road and watched me get inside the house. He just kept smiling at me. It's nothing like some of the other stories on here, but it scared the shit out of me, nonetheless. This happened when I was a sophomore in high school. I used to take private bus to school and back. However, when it came to dropping me off home, I was always the last one, because I lived a little bit outside the school district. My bus driver couldn't drop me off after dropping everyone in my school off because she had to pick up the elementary school kids. As a high schooler, we left school much earlier, so I either had to wait for her to drop off every elementary school kid off, or I could just walk home from the elementary school. That school was fairly close to my house. It was only about a 10-minute walking distance, and I would walk home every day from that stop. On one particular day, I got off the bus that would park behind the school's field in the back and started walking towards the adjacent parking lot. The school is located in the front of a very busy street that was connected to the highway, and in the front of the school there was a mall. I always wore headphones to avoid the noise of the busy street while I was walking home. When I got to the other parking lot, a small white car had just pulled up, and the guy inside it started calling out to me. I usually ignore everyone that tries to talk to me when I'm walking home, but I accidentally made eye contact, so I decided to see what he wanted. I didn't notice it then, but looking back, the man was acting very strange. He was sort of jumpy and sweaty. His car was old and he had a mess inside. In his passenger seat was a woman who looked annoyed and angry. I assumed they were just hot because it was nearly 90 degrees outside. He was asking me if I knew where the mall was. Now, the mall is across the street, but there were a few shops independent of it that you had to go around. It's still visible to the naked eye, though. I told him, yeah, just go straight behind the school, make a right, cross the busy street, then make a right at the mall. He was acting like he didn't understand what I was saying, and asked if I knew Spanish. So I explained in Spanish. Again, he pretended he didn't understand. So he asked if I could get inside the car and take him to the mall. Then he would drop me off home. In my stupid mind at the time, all I thought was this guy is really annoying, because you can literally see the mall from here. I also was thinking that maybe I should take the ride home, since I really didn't want to walk home in the heat. However, something inside me was telling me not to get into the man's car. He kept trying to convince me, and the more he talked, the more nervous he got. Behind me there was another car stationed next to a tree. Sometimes parents would wait for their kids a couple minutes before school was over. There was a woman in the car with her window down, just glaring at the guy. The guy kept looking behind me and at her. After rejecting him politely for the millionth time, he finally said okay, thank you, and sped off. I thought what a weird guy, and that maybe he's not from here, which is why the streets are confusing to him. The lady behind me said, "Be careful who you talk to." I looked in, awkwardly smiled, and said, "Yes, thanks." On my way home, all I felt was annoyance at the guy for interrupting me while I was walking home, and the lady for talking to me as if I didn't know about stranger danger. Years later, after listening to other people's Let's Not Meet stories, I realized that the man was trying to kidnap me. He was trying to get me inside his car, and the lady behind me was staring at him and making him nervous. The passenger woman was probably there to get kids' confidence, but she was probably annoyed that she had to be there with him. Maybe she didn't want to be there. I don't know. It honestly gives me chills to think that they went to the school to try to pick up children. I wonder who else they tried talking to. There's parents and security around, which is why I didn't see him as a threat at first. But if it weren't for my gut feeling, I could have easily got into the car and disappeared. Also, that lady's presence really scared him off. Creepy, sweaty guy trying to pick up kids. Let's not meet again. When I was young, I believe about 8 years old, my family was attending my brother's soccer game. Me being a bored, ADHD youth, I ran off to play in a nearby park, within view of where the parents were standing. The view of some of the park was slightly obscured by a few trees, which is an important tidbit for later. I wasn't the only kid in the park, and with some organization from one big kid, we had all become involved in an exciting game of tag. As the game dissipated, the big kid approached me. If my memory is correct, he was around 14 years old. He interrupted a game of hide and seek with me, and asked me if I wanted to see his secret hiding spot. Now, I had been educated by my parents on how to avoid sketchy situations, and avoid abductions, and this otherwise would have set off some red flags, for me except the fact that he was a teenager. So in my little head, he was just another kid. He praised it as a secret spot where we could spy on people, but nobody could see us, and claimed he had a stash of candy there that he wanted to share with me. Once we pressed further into the woods, I was grabbed from behind a tree by an older man, whose face was obstructed from me. Within a moment of him beginning to drag me, I was pushed to the ground, when the sound of a loud yelling began to draw closer to us. The cops arrived within a minute of my parents alerting me missing, and ended up capturing the 14-year-old boy, who was covered in needle marks, and finding a nearby shady van filled with illicit drugs. I believe they found the man shortly after. From earlier, when I had started playing hide-and-go-seek on the outskirts of the trees surrounding the park, my parents had noticed ahead of time that I wasn't visible from the park anymore. After a few minutes of calling my name, they decided to call the police, who arrived just in time, and I hate to imagine what could have happened if my mom hadn't been so attentive. Textbook child abduction guy. Let's not meet again. This happened about a year ago. Since then, I've never had a haircut. My mom and I were in a mall salon for a haircut. She stated my name to the receptionist, and since the salon was not that full by that time, I immediately got called. My hair was shampooed by a skinny guy who was a little too chit-chatty. He was the junior hairstylist. While he was washing my hair, my phone beeped several times. Since I had messages from my friends, he started to ask me questions like, "Do you have a lot of friends? Is that your boyfriend texting you?" I thought it was weird, however, it wasn't over yet. He started asking me where I live, where I go to school, and do I have someone waiting for me outside. Of course, I did give him the right information. He was starting to give me the creeps. Now, a junior hairstylist usually assists a senior hairstylist, right? I found relief when the senior came, because the skinny guy stopped asking me weird questions. But when the senior left for a while, he slipped a pen and paper under the table and told me to write my name in Facebook so we could be Facebook friends and talk anytime. Bro. Since I remembered the receptionist listing down my first name, I was afraid he would ask that person. I didn't pick up the pen at first, and he kept an eye on me in the mirror. Luckily, the senior came back and continued to cut my hair. When the senior was done with my hair, the junior was assigned to blow dry my hair. I was forced to write my name on the paper he gave. Since I'm aware of what he's doing, I wrote my incomplete name and changed the spelling so there's no way he could find me. Nonetheless, my hands were shaking, but I doubt he noticed it. Just when I thought he was done with his scheme, he started to touch my shoulder with his hard dick while blow-drying my hair. I wanted to scream and tell him to get the fuck off, but I really couldn't. I was scared and frozen. Take note, that was a well-known salon with a good reputation. I'm certain that every employee there was well trained. I wonder how he got there, and what he did to deserve his place. I still regret the fact that I did nothing to make him stop. I know I should have done something, I know I was a terrible person, but since then I swore to myself I'd do the right thing. If something like that happens again, horny son of a bitch, let's not meet. One night, I got a knock at my door. I live in a small studio apartment by myself at the time, and barely knew anyone in the entire apartment unit, including my only neighbor. I lived next to a corner unit and had a hallway on the other side, so his unit was the only one sharing a wall with mine. I opened the door, and it was my landlord, who promptly asked me if I'd been hearing loud noises next door. It was a noise complaint. No, I barely hear them at all. I stepped outside into the hallway and saw him for the first time. A short, stocky guy with a few prominent warts wearing his hoodie. The apartment building was mostly low-rent housing, and I had no reason to distrust the guy after living next to him and barely hearing a peep for a year. So, I vouched for him, because I don't like seeing landlords use complaints as an excuse to kick people out. Big mistake. I go back inside after telling the guy to knock on my door again, if that ever happens, so I can help out. I go back to what I was doing. Another knock on my door. This time it's the neighbor. He says, "I'm just feeling rattled. Could I ask you to come over? I can make tea." I politely decline, saying I was in the middle of something. 30 minutes later, another knock. "I've got some games. If you want to play those, we could smoke and hang out. Please, I just need someone," he pleaded. Again, said no. And yet another knock, and finally he wore down my patience. "Fine. I'll come over for a little bit, but I'm bringing my own drink." I grabbed my pepper spray and stuffed it into my back pocket, just in case. His room was dimly lit and full of large surrealistic paintings that depicted people in twisted positions. He had tons of keepsakes, everything from dolls to woodcut idols, nailed up to the wall. He clearly didn't get a lot of visitors. He starts brewing some tea, asks again if I want some. I politely decline. Then out of the corner of my eye, I noticed it. A ball-peen hammer sitting directly next to the tea kettle. I eyed that thing like a hawk, making sure his hand never strayed from the kettle. I'm a shut-in kind of girl, so I'm not exactly strong or anything, and he could have easily overpowered me. I try to put it out of my mind, but the atmosphere keeps sending me into a fight or flight. Something about this guy was wrong, but my brain was telling me to leave. But for some reason I stayed. He and I started talking about art, and he seemed oddly fixated on the concepts of masculinity as dominant, and the feminine as the artistic supplication self. I'm an illustrator and not super familiar with high art, so I tried to make normal conversation about his paintings and his job, but it kept steering back to his fascination with gender dysmorphism. Then he says, "Want to see something I'm working on?" A chill runs up my spine. For some reason, I say, "Sure." He then boots up his desktop and shows me what he calls a machine. It's a video shot in and around the city. It contains the occasional shots of random subway walls and buildings, old machinery, and then it starts showing random people off the street. It was shot from a phone camera, and the angle suggested that those people weren't aware he was filming them. And I recognized the locations, all places relatively nearby. This continued for 10 minutes, until I finally had enough. I said, "Sorry, man. I really gotta get back. My friends are waiting on me." "Oh, but the tea isn't done yet." He starts to walk over to the tea kettle again. The hammer is still right there and on the stove next to his hand. I started walking to the door. It's at this point that my brain is telling me to get out, though nothing was especially a giant red flag so far. Just an eccentric painter guy with some weird hobbies who really wanted me to stay over. Thankfully, I managed to politely make my escape. Mind you, this man is my neighbor, and has been the entire time I've lived here. I call up a nearby friend and ask to stay the night, but it didn't matter. This is where I live. He knew exactly where I lived, and that I lived alone. The next morning I returned to my place. I felt awful. I barely slept the night prior, so I decided to take a shower. That's when I saw it. A small hole in the tile, just big enough to see through. The bedroom shared the same wall with him. How long had he been there? I looked through it, and clear as day, I could see back into that dingy apartment. I promptly covered it. I never heard from him again. No knocks or anything. 2 months later, I decided to move. The landlord's brother, who was filling in for him for the next week while I was moving out, asked me why I was moving. I mentioned I had a bad experience with someone in the building, and I didn't want to rat him out or anything, but the brother already knew who it was. Oh, him. Don't worry about him. He's harmless. How did the landlord's brother, who had barely even operated the building before, know about my neighbor? Had someone else had a similar experience with him? Was this common enough that he was even aware? I couldn't stop thinking about that hole in the shower, the hammer, the dolls nailed up on the wall, his machine. And why was this guy so sure about him being harmless? I want to believe he was just some eccentric artist with strange fascinations, but that old gnawing feeling just won't go away. Either way, let's not meet again. I'm going to start by saying this was a widely publicized case, so a few details will be changed, but the main part of this is accurate. Also, I'm on mobile, so sorry for any errors. A few years ago, I worked at a popular hookah lounge in my town. We had many regulars, so, of course, I got to know many people and made some lasting friendships with a few. Among those regulars was a group of people I wasn't terribly fond of, except one girl who I'll call Rachel. Rachel was a kind girl who I enjoyed talking to. I just didn't approve of the people she hung out with, or her decisions she made. But it was her life, so what place did I have to say anything? Eventually Rachel started dating another regular who was a part of my friend group. We'll call him Ben. This is when we got a lot closer, and she started to trust me and confide in me more. Eventually Rachel and Ben broke up, and it devastated Rachel. I clearly remember her messaging him to hang out, and her crying on my shoulder for half an hour. During the relationship, Rachel stopped hanging around the shady people as much, but of course, afterwards she went back to them, and started partying a lot and doing who knows what. She stopped talking to me much and eventually started dating some other guy in the shady group. We'll call him Greg. Of course, that relationship went south, due to reasons unknown to me, but Rachel ended up filing for a restraining order against Greg. A few days, I think, later Rachel went missing, and was never heard from again. It was awful. Her family started showing up to talk to me, asking if I'd seen her. I hadn't, but apparently someone told them that she was seen downtown somewhere. It broke my heart. One day during a busy shift, someone we both talked to sometimes showed up and talked to me about Rachel's disappearance. We'll call him POS. POS told me he had heard about her being seen somewhere and wanted to know if I knew about it. He even asked if I heard anything bad happen to her. I'm assuming he thought since I worked at a regular hangout spot of hers, I'd hear something. I told him I hadn't, and we hugged before he walked off to talk to other people. Months passed before I heard anything about Rachel. Her family showed up from time to time asking about her, but nothing changed. After a year after her disappearance, the police had a breakthrough in their case, and her body was found. After some investigating, the police discovered that Greg had hired POS to kill Rachel, and he did. He hid her body and continued life as usual. The fact that I spoke to POS after the fact and even hugged him still weighs on my conscience. It's been years and I'm still so upset about it. He's in prison, and I'll likely never see him again. But it still hurts. I spoke to her family about having hugged the man who killed her. I wish I had been a better friend to her. Maybe I could have saved her. I could have insisted that she not hang out with those people. I don't blame myself for her murder, but I do wish I could have done something. I had been more insistent friend, maybe she'd still be here. Who knows? All I know is that for whatever reason, I ever do see him again, it won't be a good thing for him. He knows she was dead, and he still asked me if I'd seen her, or heard anything about her. P.O.S. I hope you suffer. So, this happened when I was about 18. So about 10 years ago. I was visiting my boyfriend at the time at his college dorm. He went to a pretty popular college in California. So, there was a massive campus. We met up at his dorm and decided to go over his cousin's apartment that was across the campus. We were drinking and smoking, doing a young adolescent's do, and I smoked a little too much, and ended up passing out on the couch. All of a sudden, I had this overwhelming feeling that I needed to wake up. I opened my eyes and realized that the blinds to the patio were open, and you can see right into the room where I was sleeping. I then realized I was alone in the room, so I called out to my boyfriend, but I didn't get a response. So I came to the conclusion that I'm in the apartment alone. I get up and go outside and see my boyfriend and his cousin walking around the parking lot area. I'm super confused at this point, so I go and see why they left me alone in the apartment. Apparently, they had heard a girl screaming, and were seeing what they were going to do if they could do anything to help. There had been a couple of girls that had been previously assaulted recently on the campus, so everybody was on high alert. So we walked around for a couple of minutes, but we didn't see anybody or hear any more screams, so we started heading back to the apartment. This literally only took about 5 minutes, maybe less. As we're on our way back to his apartment, we see this person in all black with their hood on come out of nowhere and walk right into the apartment. I was just asleep a few minutes prior, but it wasn't like a regular walk. It was more like a power walk, and it looked like he was holding something in his hands. We all kind of scream, "Hey!" and start running back to the apartment. The guy then runs out of the apartment and hops down to this area, underneath the patio area. By the time we get to where he jumped, he was gone. Which kind of creeped me out because where he jumped was like this creek area, and it was completely pitch black. Not to mention, we weren't that far from the apartment, so it only took us about 30 to 45 seconds to run back. I'm pretty sure whoever it was saw me asleep on the couch. It gives me chills to think of what could have happened if I didn't wake up. I was all alone, and my boyfriend and his cousin were distracted by someone they thought were in need of help. So, creepy guy who likes to prey on sleeping girls, let's not meet. This is my other encounter I had while I was on a walk home from college course. This took place in autumn, about a month or so after the first encounter, which I talked about in my other post. After the first instance with the guy driving slowly towards me, I bought a small thing of handheld pepper spray that I held on to when I walked home. My college course was every Wednesday, and I would always take the same route home. I didn't have a car or a bike, so I would just walk home. It was starting to get closer to winter, which meant I would have to leave class early in order to walk home, while it was still light out. Since it got darker and darker earlier, I had actually purchased an emergency flashlight at the gas station in my town. This instance, however, my professor got caught up in a lecture that was 20 minutes longer than expected, around 6:50 p.m. By the time I set off my walk home, it was already dark. My path consisted of walking up a walkway on a hill, still in town. There were several hills that connected to the main road at the top. At the top of these hills were a couple of houses and housing complexes, with the streetlights more sparse than at the bottom of the hill. I had walked up the hill, turned left, and continued fast walking forward. Up ahead, there was a crosswalk with a street lamp on the other side. At this point, I was already on high alert due to having to walk home in the dark, so I had my pepper spray clutched on my hand. I was just at the start of the crosswalk when I heard someone behind me, like a tapping sound. So, I glanced behind me to see the noise. A shirtless man who looked to be in his mid-20s was in a full dead sprint towards me. Not a normal jog, a full-on sprint. I don't know how, but after that I was almost instantly on the other side of the crosswalk facing him, holding my pepper spray outstretched under my sleeve. He slowed down and stopped at the crosswalk. I flipped my sleeve up to show the pepper spray, and shined my flashlight on him. And we stood there staring at each other for maybe half a minute, on either end of the crosswalk. Neither of us spoke a word. Eventually, he turned around and started jogging casually down the path, before turning down the hill at the path I had walked up earlier. Up until that point, I had been checking behind me frequently, and around me, and I didn't see or hear anyone. Only until I heard those footsteps and looked behind me did I see him. The rest of the walk home, I half ran, half fast walked until I was in my driveway. I think of the possibility that maybe he could have been a jogger, but there were things about him that were off. First, he was shirtless in cold weather. I was wearing a sweater, and even after running home I was freezing. Second, he had no water, light, or reflective gear. After a few feet from the lamppost, it was nearly pitch black. Either way, I told my professor what happened next time I saw her in class, and she offered me rides home if the lectures were past dark. Maybe it was a jogger, or someone with ill intentions, but I hope I never meet them again. This happened to me years ago in college, but I still think about it on a fairly regular basis, and shudder. I was about 19 and had transferred to a college very, very far from home. My parents had raised me pretty independent, so it didn't upset me. I saw it as a fun challenge. One of the biggest changes to get used to was not having a car. I could have gotten one, I guess, but it would have been a hassle to find places to keep it when I wasn't at school, etc. So I just opted for the bus instead. I'm going to sound like a country bumpkin, but it felt weirdly adult saying that I was taking the bus somewhere, and it always weirded me out just a little bit. I'm not a big fan of person-to-person interactions, so I always made sure to sit up front, hopefully by myself, but with a bag in the other seat. If it wasn't busy, I'm anxious, not rude. And not only headphones in, but a book open as well, all friendly signals to please go away. Thing is, I'm not that great at actually telling people to go away. I had gotten on the bus to head to the mall for a bit, and realized someone was talking to me. I paused my music and looked up. A homeless man was asking if the seat was taken. There weren't really a lot of people on the bus, but I felt awkward and very rude saying no, like I was judging him. Honestly, a celebrity could have asked if they sit next to me, and they'd get the same horrified reaction. But still, I didn't want to appear unkind. So I moved my bag and then made a big show of putting my music back on and raising my book up to read. I had to keep pausing my music because the man kept talking to me. I kept trying to downplay it to myself that it was just his idea of small talk, even though the questions pointed fixated on details about me, my age, and how pretty I was. If I had a boyfriend. I lied and said yes, of course, and that didn't discourage interest at all, of course, and so on. It was a very, very long 20 minutes. He kept getting closer too, never overtly touching or filling the space in a way that I could make an obvious complaint about. But by the time we arrived, he was practically faced completely towards me, and was definitely blocking me from moving to another seat. Finally, my stop came and I jumped up. He was perfectly nice about moving, so that I can get by, or so I thought. Turns out he was actually just getting up himself to get out to the same spot, not pausing for a moment to talk to me. Great. It was the middle of the day on a crowded street, so I didn't feel like I was in immediate danger, and therefore felt like anything other than open welcoming would be the height of rudeness for me. I realize these sort of paranoias are something my anxiety ramps up, and isn't necessarily all due to social training. But the seeds are there and all the same. I smiled awkwardly and moved towards the mall, only for him to fall in step with me, continuing to ask after details about myself and my boyfriend. Being naive, I tried to cut him off with, "Oh, I'm heading to the mall." But of course, that gave him the chance to say, Me too. And well, we headed there together. He started talking to me about how good of friends we were now, and how close he felt to me, and so on. Honestly, I checked out a good while ago, and was just trying to find ways to ditch this guy. I ducked into the first store I saw when I got to the mall, and he followed me in. I was at this point not even making full sentences, just mumbling things about, "Oh, sorry, I need to," and then I tried to lose him down another aisle. It didn't work. I finally made a turn he couldn't follow quick enough, and literally hid behind some shelves waiting for him to go by. I dashed out of the store and he saw me and yelled for me to wait, and ran after. I ran down the strip and dashed into another random store and went straight to the back to the dressing rooms. I hid in one of them for as long as I felt that I could, and then I peeked out. I saw him in the larger mall area, scanning. God, it was chilling. He finally moved off down the wrong way, and I stayed in the store another half an hour, pretending to look at clothes. I don't know what the shop girl must have thought. I was clearly shaken and to the point of tears, but I had called my mother by that point and was keeping her on the phone. Genius me not only didn't think to ask the shop girl for help, but I didn't tell my mom what had happened either. I just figured she'd be mad at me for not having a good sense of get rid of the guy faster. When I left, I ran out of the mall and went around to the different bus stop, in case the man would be back at the first one. I was so scared that he would show up again, and this time, follow me to my apartment. There's a lot I didn't do right in this situation, but I think the worst part is that I still guilt myself, and that he likely just had mental problems, and I should have handled things better. And it was cruel of me to literally run away. It's terrifying to know that your own mind wants to override your instincts to stay alive, with some construct of politeness. Creepy guy on buses, let's not meet. This past New Year's was mine and my boyfriend's 4-year anniversary. We typically don't do much, so this year we decided to make it special by planning a romantic getaway. At the time, the two of us were living in Seattle, and we rented a cabin in a snowy small town for the weekend. We found a cabin on Airbnb, with a hot tub, and we were sold. The cabin was, of course, the last house on the road. To get to it, you had to drive down a small, removed, privated road that ended in a roundabout. Off the roundabout was a long uphill driveway leading up to our cabin. We got to the cabin, and it was snowy and beautiful. The cabin itself sat at the top of a garage, and you needed to take stairs on the back side of the property to get to the front door. When we got inside, there was a booklet with all the cabin's info outlined. The book said that during our snowy season, don't be surprised if there's contracted snowplowers showed up to clear off the driveway. Okay, sounds good. We unpacked and realized that there was no service on either of our phones, but the booklet told us that there was a landline in the cabin if we needed anything. We spent the first night by the fire playing board games and drinking wine. The weekend was exactly what we needed. We planned to spend the next day in town and that night. I had booked us a reservation for a nice dinner. We were gone almost all day, only returning briefly to get dressed up to enjoy some good food. Dinner was great, and we were excited to head back to the cabin for some champagne hot tubbing. While at dinner, the temperature had dropped, and it snowed for the first time that day, coating everything in a fresh layer of powder. We drove down the private road and got to the driveway. At that point, my boyfriend stopped the car, headlight shining in front, and asked if I noticed new tire tracks. I looked at the driveway, hoping to quickly distinguish the new tire tracks, but they were there immediately. We remembered that the snowplowers could have stopped by, but the issue was, we saw the tire tracks because of the snow, and who plows in the dark. We also knew that once we were in the cabin, we had no service on our cell phones, so we figured we would head back into town and message our Airbnb host and ask them if one of their friends had stopped by their apartment. We waited for a while in town for a reply from our host, but didn't hear back. We could have called, but at that point it was past 10, and we didn't want to be bad guests. We figured we blew the whole thing out of proportion, and might as well head back to the cabin. After all, I am big into true crime, spooky subreddits, and horror movies, so I was probably just psyching myself out. My boyfriend drove us back, and this time, we actually drove up the driveway. Towards the top of the hill, part of the driveway, I noticed something. My stomach dropped as I noticed footprints on the property. We backed down the driveway and took a closer look to see if there were more footprints. From what it looked like, someone had drove up the driveway, reversed down, parked, and then got out of the car, and walked onto the property. Since we had now also driven on the tracks, we couldn't find where the footprints ended. The property was quite large with tons of trees and brush, and we knew that these footprints could go anywhere. The moment we saw footprints, we decided to call the police. We figured it was better safe than sorry. We would just have an officer go onto the property with us and check everything out. We drove down the road till we got service, called the police, and waited for their arrival. The policeman showed up and we followed him onto the property. The police officer scanned the property and determined there was no one out there. Obviously, we were a little shaken up, and a lot embarrassed. We thanked the officer and he left. Needless to say, neither of us wanted to sit in the hot tub in the dark woods after what had happened. Instead, we locked the doors and watched the movie. Champagne-less, we were both tired from the day and passed out pretty quickly. At 3 a.m., we both woke up on the couch with the TV on and all the lights, laughing about how the night didn't turn out as planned. As my boyfriend went to brush his teeth, we heard a noise. It sounded mechanical and only lasted a few seconds. We looked at each other and froze. The garage door. There are very few reasons that someone would need to open the garage door of a guest-occupied Airbnb at 3 in the morning. Like I said, we woke up to all the lights on, and the cabin had lots of windows. We knew that if someone was outside, they knew we were there, and they could see us. I immediately grabbed the landline and dialed 911. We sat crouched in the Airbnb, praying for the police to arrive. We knew that whoever had made those tracks was still on the property, and this time, they were making noise. As I sat talking to the operator, we heard a bang in the balcony, as if someone threw something up onto it. I was also losing my absolute shit when the operator told me the police were nearby. All of a sudden, they were there. We saw the police lights and watched them search the property. Soon we heard banging on the door. It was the police. We were okay. At the door were 2 policemen, one in front of us, and one a little behind, kind of kicking around snow and looking at the ground. I immediately noticed the police officer in the back, as the officer that did the initial check on the property. The police officer told us that not only was the garage door shut, but it was locked. And again, there was no signs of someone on the property. We discussed leaving, but the police officer said the road conditions were too dangerous that time of night. I looked at the police officer who had come out to the property twice, and felt I had deeply disappointed him. My boyfriend and I went back inside, again locking all the doors, and tried to sleep. The next day we were leaving, and while we survived the night, I didn't feel right in the cabin anymore. It was forever the spooky cabin in my head, and I wanted to leave. As we packed, we heard the same noise. We heard at 3 a.m. Oh, it was the heater. A heater that sounds just like a garage. The sound lasts the same duration. My boyfriend looked at me and immediately said, "You need to give up your murder shows," and walked away. As if. As for the banging on the balcony, it was just the perfectly timed fall of a pine cone. I promise I'm not paranoid. I think back on this story a lot, and I'm embarrassed about how little came of it, but I'm also incredibly grateful for the same reason. But whoever drove onto the property and walked around, thank you for triggering all my nightmares. Please stay home and, oh yeah, let's not meet. So, about a year ago, I moved into a new apartment, and it was my second year living alone. The city was relatively small, and I go to a local university there. One night I was bored at home, and decided to set up a Tinder date. I was talking to this apparent normal guy, and he asked if he could come over to my place. At the time, I did not see anything wrong with that, so I invited him and said I lived alone. About 20 minutes after the message, he arrives at my apartment, wearing a black hoodie, big earphones, and he asked if there was security cameras in the hallways. I said there were a couple, and from that I could feel that I just made a mistake. He got into my apartment and we made out for like 10 minutes in my bed. Then he asked if he could try some of his kinks on me. At the moment, I was not thinking rationally anymore, and I said yeah. He started biting my neck, then my chest, then my legs, and then he started with some really weird kinks. He started pinching me really hard in the between me down there, pulling my skin and just really digging his nails into my body. At this time, I was completely panicking and was asking him to stop, but he wouldn't. To top things off, he started choking me, and I couldn't get him off of me, 'cause he was like this big buff dude. At least he stopped and I rushed to the bathroom, saying I needed to pee. In no time, I grabbed a knife, locked myself in the bathroom, and called my other friends to come help me. I got out and told him to get the fuck out of my apartment, or I would call the police. To my surprise, he tried to attack me, but I had a knife in my hand, and I started screaming. After hearing my doorbell, he quickly got dressed and rushed down the stairs. Please be careful when bringing strange people to your home. This shit scared me for life, and I don't think I can do Tinder dates again. This isn't super intense, but it scared the shit out of me. So this happened about 7 to 8 months ago. I live in Orlando in an apartment with my fiance and best friend. At the time of this incident, my best friend's boyfriend was also living with us. The apartment complex is really wonderful, considering we were all in our young 20-somethings, working in the theme park industry. We were absolutely head over heels that we landed the place. A little context. The Orlando/Kissimmee area can be rough, particularly concerning sex trafficking, and as such I've always tried to take extra care when traveling alone, especially at night. But I never considered that I would be in any danger living on the 3rd floor in my gated apartment complex. Naive of me, I realize now. The day the event takes place, I worked a very early shift. It was opening week at Galaxy's Edge, so I was clocking in as early as 3 a.m., which sucked. But it also meant I got to be home by noon or 1, which I loved. I got home, got comfy, turned on something in the living room, and relaxed on the couch, eventually drifting off into a nap. That's when I hear the knocking. But it wasn't polite neighbor knocking, it was banging. It was so loud at first that even I thought it jolted me out of my sleep. I thought maybe I was having a dream. But after maybe a minute or so, another series of loud bangs. The ferocity of the knocks had me scared shitless already. But reasoning I'm a big girl, I went to my front door to look through my peephole. I saw a man I had never seen before there, looking right into it. That was enough to convince me to get my roommates for some backup. They were in their bedrooms with the doors closed and fans/music on high. I think they were trying to cover the noise of some activities they maybe didn't want me to hear. It was a little awkward, but I knew the situation wasn't something to mess around with. They come out, and we ask him what he wants through the door. He simply replies, "I need you to take a step outside." So we ask again, what is it that he wants? Again, just insisting we step outside to talk. Won't tell us why or who he is, just that we need to open the door. This goes on for a few minutes. Getting more anxious and frustrated, I called 911 and informed him that I was. He went downstairs fast but didn't leave. Instead, he was peering up into our apartment complex through the window. We have a big window. The police get there and he tells them that he wanted to speak to us because we were shining lights from our apartment into his, which was on the 1st floor across the street. Mind you, up until this day I'd never seen him, or even knew he lived there, and never saw him again. The cops tell us they don't buy it at all, but there's nothing they can do besides tell us to be safe, and call again if he continues to interact with us. They give him a warning not to trespass again and leave. When I tell you that night, we went to Walmart and got all kinds of things for the apartment. Bats, machetes, pepper spray. We must have looked insane. I didn't walk down to my car alone for a month, and kept the bat with me at all times. Times passed, and still no sign of him. I don't know if he actually lived there or not. I'm not sure what this man wanted with me, or my roommates, but I'm glad I never found out. So, if you're reading this, Mr. Scary Neighbor Man, let's not meet. So, it's any other day in the life of a bored teen during quarantine. I want to get out of the house and do something. My dad comes and agrees to go on the bike ride with me. We go to the neighborhood park that's less than a mile from where I live. So it's all good. On the way there, we're biking down the street. The park is on and we hear a whistle, like a gym teacher whistle. My dad and I look back and there's a shirtless guy biking behind us. We really didn't care, so we kept going. The park is like 2 minutes away. When we get there, the shirtless guy stops and turns with us. I didn't really want to look behind me, so I just tell my dad to keep going, and we do. There's a bike trail that goes behind the park, so we go on that until right before it gets dark. I talk to my dad as we're biking, saying like, well, that was kind of weird, and I was thinking he was just trying to tell us that the park was closed or something. My dad just laughs it off, and we finally finish the trail and come out to the park. And guess who we see? The same shirtless guy is sitting on the sidewalk at the entrance of the park, smoking a cigarette or something. I got a better look at him this time, and it almost looked like a sheath on his back. Yes, like a sword sheath. So I circle back to my dad and tell him he's sitting there. My dad doesn't seem to care and goes ahead of me. I look back when I get out of the entrance and he's still sitting there. Now again, about 2 minutes later, just making sure I look back again. And there he was biking after us. We hear the whistle, and my dad says just keep biking. Keep in mind, I was on my way back to the house, and there's a lot of uphills, so we have to grind to get back up. I hear him whistle, so I speed up on the bike and just pedal faster and faster. Now, my dad and the shirtless guy are like 20 feet apart, and I'm about 200 feet in front of them. I don't want to know what happened if the shirtless guy catches you. So I turn right on the wrong street and hide behind a truck, in someone's driveway waiting for them to pass. They do, and I notice my daddy's yelling at the guy, stop and no. Stuff like that. You know, basic go away type sayings. The hill to get back to the house is coming up, so my dad takes the ride and starts going up, and surprise, surprise, the shirtless guy is following him. I'm behind them now, so as my dad's slowing down, the shirtless guy tries to ram him and stop his bike. I zoom up behind the shirtless guy, and he tries to maneuver his bike to stop mine. And being the experienced bike rider I am, I kick his bike down while still riding mine up the hill. I'm pretty sure things broke on his bike as I saw pieces fall into the road. I wasn't really sure if they were essential for the bike to work, but he didn't follow me up the hill. I jokingly told my dad, "You're welcome." And we stop at the midpoint of the hill and watch him. I wasn't sure if we should call the cops or anything, so my dad and I just talked about what we should do. We decided not to call anyone, so I biked up the rest of the hill, still shaking, and still watching our backs. Thankfully, he didn't follow us that far. Needless to say, that was the quickest I've ever gone up that hill. And needless to say, I don't want to go on that trail alone anymore, especially nearing dark. So, to that shirtless guy who tried to stop my dad and I with a whistle, let's not meet. This happened in 2016, and the town is a very small town located in Ontario, Canada. The town is always such a peaceful place, with a small highway in the middle. My name is McKinley, and my age at the time was 15, and this happened in late September, a few weeks after high school started. It all started with the normal routine of getting to the bus stop by 7 a.m., with my little brother, who is an age under, following me there. I kept passing the last few houses till I saw it, and I thought that it was some type of Halloween dummy, with the pale arms and legs and all in a ball, curled up into a ball. But it wasn't October yet. I kept my distance and looked at the figure a little more, and noticed it had a strong detail of hair on the legs, making me know it was a real human. I told the others that later came about the figure at the bus stop, and they thought it was a homeless person. I'd never seen a homeless person ever in my life. Seeing the crime TV shows made me think it was a dead body. But when I went up to it, I seen its hand move a little. I realized it was alive. I was too scared to tell my bus driver. But when I got to my high school, I told my teacher, and was told to tell the secretary. I told the secretary, and she told the school cop. I told what had happened, and he sent a cruiser to check it out. Turned out to be a boy that once went to the same public school as me before I moved. But the thing that was off was that there was no car in sight. I knew where the boy lived from the past when the bus picked him up from school, which I would say was about a 20-minute drive from the town I lived in. Sadly, since it was past 7, when the cruiser showed up, they couldn't do a thing. I will never forget what he looked like again. Let me hope I never see him again. This happened this past year, my senior year of undergrad. I attend a pretty big university with 2 bus stops. The first one is for a smaller portion of the school, and the second one is the main one that people use. But they're pretty far apart. I got out of class and was next to the small bus stop around sunset. This guy, I'll call him Eric, comes up to me, of all people in line, and starts asking if this bus would take him to one of the students' housing areas. It was kind of odd because it was a part way into the year, but whatever. He seemed genuinely confused. I explained yes, this bus would take him there, and his bus stop is the same one I get off. He asked if he could wait in line with me, and he was nice, so I said sure. We're talking, waiting for the bus, and it doesn't come. So I decide to walk to the main stop, and he follows. Again, at this point, it's not creepy because it was just small talk. We walk to the other bus stop, and we jump on one over there. Eric sits next to me, and is berating me with questions that I'm now answering very shortly. Then everything he says is flirty. Like, yeah, come see my pool, so we can tan. Let's work out together, and get sweaty in the sauna. All very weird and random. And I just don't say much because everyone on the bus can hear the conversation. And he asks for my number, which I lie about. But this fucker is like, okay, let me call you. Obviously, I don't get a call. And Eric's like, what the fuck? And I'm like, oh, my bad. I knew he would call it again. So I just gave him the right number. Now I'm regretting telling him I stopped. But I still get off with him. He continues the flirty comments, but the street I'm parked on is opposite of his route home. I say goodbye, and wait till he's out of sight. I get in my car and drive away. At this point, it's late and he is gone, so I just went home and forgot about it. He texted me a couple times the next few weeks, all of which I ignore. Eventually he stopped and I forgot about the encounter. Fast forward a few months and I rarely use the bus anymore, because I have a parking pass. One day after class, I decided to go to Vron's right next to the original bus stop. I park in the farthest row because it's very busy, and my car is in the middle of the row. I'm on a quick mission, so I'm rushing down to the first aisle, and some guy turns to check me out, but I ignore it and keep going. I felt the guy's eyes on me, and still, I thought, how do I know this dude? Then I get in line, and there he is at the front of the line grinning at me. It's Eric from the bus. And I'm like, fuck this. So I switch lines, and he checks out way before I do, and leaves. I get my stuff and walk out to my car. I was parked just far enough that you couldn't see my car, just the direction it was in. As I get closer, there's Eric standing right in front of my car. This was disturbing because he wasn't waiting at the door of the store in the middle of the lot. Nope, right at my car. He positions himself in between me and the car, and he's grinning and says, I know you. I played dumb, saying, sorry, you must have me confused. And he says, no, you're blank from school. I say, no, that's not me. I don't go to that school. He believes me and starts aggressively asking me out. I say, no thank you. I have a boyfriend. He says, okay, so you can't have friends? And I look at him and say sarcastically, do you really want to just be my friend? He just grins at me and replies, no. He then says, don't worry. When you're single, I will find you." The way he said it was very unnatural and creepy. He finally gets out of my way and lets me into my car. He watches me leave the parking lot, and I drove to my brother's house just because of how unsettling that encounter was. On one occasion, I came from a group project and had to take the bus. It was crowded from when I got on, so I sat in the first seat I saw. I can hear the conversation behind me, and instantly recognize Eric's voice. The girl he was talking to seemed to be really into the conversation, surprisingly. But now here I was on the bus, to school, that I told this creep I didn't go to. I tried to get off quickly, but somehow Eric and this girl get off before me. I'm relieved and try to keep a distance. I don't see them anymore and turn a corner. And there he is again waiting for me. He doesn't move though. He just grins at me and says, "Hi, blank." Or are you going by blank right now? Both my name and the fake one when I played dumb at Vaughn's. I just walked away and called my friends to meet me on campus. The shelter in place was issued the next week, and I moved home. Despite the COVID-19 circumstances, I never have to see Eric again.